this. Thank you everyone for being here for this bootcamp session on business model and monetization and manufacturing. So we welcome Mr. Anand Padmanathan. So to give a brief about him, Anand is a seasoned product designer, innovator, and a specialist in healthcare systems, designing for the manufacturability of medical devices. He's an ex-CIO Monsanto, pioneered the electronic submission of the regulatory submissions to the CVH FDA in the late 90s. So we are privileged to have you on board, sir. Thank you so much, and over to you, sir. So
Okay.
you're on mute, sir.
Are you able to hear me, guys?
Yes, sir. Crisp and clear.
Okay, cool. All right, so we'll get into it. Um, so primarily, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going back and forth between a few things, right? And I will see how long my video lasts because I work from the Indian Institute of Science. So here the network is pretty bad. If I have the video on after some time, I think the whole thing will kind of um, lag and then close down. So let's see how that goes. Okay. So I apologize. I was supposed to take the session in person, but something came up. Which I couldn't avoid in the family, so I had to go ahead and do this. I thank Jinsev and the team for providing an opportunity to do it virtually. I think now that I've got the first dose of the vaccine, I think I'm a little bit more confident of doing more face-to-face things. All right. Anyway, what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be sharing. It's more of sharing than anything else. Sharing what I've done in the past. So I have built and sold companies before. I have built and sold healthcare companies. I've built and sold smart energy companies, and I am in the process of selling a medical device company. Right. So, and I do a lot of different things. So I've seen business models from a venture capital perspective. Right. I'm a LP with a fund. I've also gone and seen the other side of things where as a startup you go and you look at raising money as well, right? So hopefully some of the perspectives I'm able to bring from my experience will hopefully be helpful to you guys. Okay. So to start off first, so one of the things which I did, when I was doing my startup journey was initially, right, I thought that if I have a cool technology, right, if I'm able to build something cool, then people will automatically want to have that, right? That probably came from my perspective of being a technology guy, right? I love technology. I love developing cool things. But very quickly, I found that that was not the case, right? So you could actually build really cool stuff. You could even go ahead and patent it, but yet nobody may even want to buy it, right? In fact, that's one of the big issues which I see quite a bit of from the VC side of things, where people go ahead and build stuff because it's cool, and then they try to sell it, and nobody wants to buy it, right? So nowadays, I've become a little bit wiser, and I say that, look, I think one of the first things you have to do is before you even go and build something, you have to look at the market, right? You have to look at the business model of things. You have to look at it and say, hey, if I take this idea and if I go ahead and if I want to do something with this, maybe build a product or a service, will the market be supportive of that? Not only supportive of that, will they actually pay me some money for that, right? Which is more important, right? And that money which they pay, will that be enough for me to cover my costs? And will that be enough for me to put food on the table? That's the first. That's the first thing to keep in mind, right? Putting food on the table. Then comes the issue around profitability and aspects around that. Okay, what I've really been doing. And I run a startup network in IM Bangalore as well. It's called Pitchtune. I've also in the past run something called House of Genius. These are all not-for-profit networks, primarily to help startups either fine-tune their idea or fine-tune their pitch, so as to speak. Right now, of course, after COVID, I think most of these things haven't been working well, primarily because these kinds of sessions work best face to face. Okay, so I'll just jump straight in, and please stop me and ask questions. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sharing some perspective around business model. And then what I'm also going to be doing is I'm also going to be sharing an easy template, which I'm pretty sure most of you would have probably used, the business canvas. And then I will also share something which I myself have written up, which I found useful as a framework. And then we will talk that through and see how we can learn from that. Okay. So typically, when you look at a business idea, right? So you start off with, you either this comes about because you've seen somebody having a challenge, or you've seen somebody struggling with something, or you've done your research and you found that, hey, this is an idea. Maybe this is something I could look and do and convert that into a business, right? That is kind of the original conception of the business. Then you take that and then you refine it through your experience, and you say, hey, and this experience could either be because you're a technologist, or this experience could either be because you're a business guy, or because you're a customer service guy, or whatever. And you say, you know what, yeah, I think this idea is good, but if I put, let's say for example, if I put a machine learning algorithm over this particular problem, then maybe I may be able to better how the situation is today as compared to before, right? So the whole idea of what you're trying to do is you're trying to do something which will actually make the situation better than what it used to be, right? And that's also one of the core tenets of what is known as design thinking as well, right? So you'll take that, you'll refine it through experience, then you'll build competence, right? Which means you'll either make it really good. This tech competence could either be based on your product form, could be based on your product service model, could be based on your channel, could be based on your pricing, could be a whole variety of different things, right? You build competence, and then that competence satisfies customers, right? So either you do it at a low cost model, or you do it at a super duper product form which people just love, so customers love it, and which actually gives you competitive advantage as well, right? So when you have customers who love what you do, you take advantage of the market forces, you build profits, right? And then what you do is you take some of the profits, and you put it back into building your own company or your own product, or a better product or a better service. And some of that you take and you look at building newer things, right? Newer opportunities, which will satisfy whoever. Stakeholders could be you, your co-founders, your investors, your customers, whoever, right? So typically, this is how the genesis of a business idea kind of works, right? So if we get into medical devices, and this is one of the companies which we're trying to sell off, right? It's a point of care medical device company formed along with people in Stanford, right? Where what we've been doing is we've been trying to look at using a mobile phone to actually do point of care diagnostics, primarily in TSH, right? So when you look at this, right, and when you look at the medical devices company or even healthcare company broadly, right, you will see that there's a lot of onus on you as a startup, as a founder, or as a management team or whatever, right? And the onus is primarily driven by regulatory frameworks, right? So as compared to any other business, right, when you're looking at healthcare or when you're looking at medical devices, things get complicated very fast, right? Why? Because the whole business model has to work on a doing it right perspective, right? What does doing it right mean? Doing it right means making sure you hire the right people, making sure you have the right design processes in place, making sure you have the right facility in place, making sure you have the right IT systems in place, making sure you have the right quality controls in place, making sure you have the right regulatory frameworks, calibration, and aspects in place. Those all have to come together. So that's one of the big challenges with medical device companies, right, or healthcare companies. And depending on what side you play, right, you could play a wellness game, which means my product is for wellness, which means that you don't have too much of the controls you need to have from a typical medical device company perspective. Or you could play the, what, I'm going to play the diagnostic game, right? My device is actually going to be a medical device, right? Then again, then you starts the ball game, right? Then you run into, like India has the CDCSO, you have the Indian Drug Act, then, or if you're looking at Europe, you have the MDR, you have the CE certification, things like that. If you look at the US, you have the FDA certification you need to look at. Of course, you have 21 CFR Part 11, you have 21 CFR 820.A, you have a whole bunch of different things you have to comply with. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind, right? So from a business model perspective, when you're looking at medical devices, pretty much everything you do, my recommendation is start doing it right from day one, right? And I can tell you a story of how, when we were actually going for FDA 510K, which is your pre-market approval, the FDA asked us for, can you share with us the original blue books of your design, right? Which means these are the sketches you needed to have documented and kept, right? And when we were actually working through, we were so focused on building the product and things like that, that we didn't keep it properly. We didn't have it organized well. So that's what I mean by doing it right? Which means, and if you look at it here, right, every aspect. So for the facilities has to be overseen by management. Not only overseen, right? There is a process called calibration, which means you need to keep constantly reviewing and making sure that things are on track. Not just I do it once and I forget it, like what we do for an ISO certification or a CMM certification, right? We just get our act together when we want to apply for certification. That's not the case in this space, right? We have to have constant reviews, right? Again, human resources, you have to have constant oversight. Purchasing, you have to have constant oversight. Again, within purchasing, you have input QR, input QC, right? Raw material QC, semi-finished good QC, finished good QC. I mean, a whole bunch of different things, right? Which you have to have oversight on. You need to have oversight on your marketing, making sure that you're not telling lies. Because I don't know if you guys have been tracking the news, but recently a few guys got jammed because they were saying things which the product probably wouldn't do, right? It was a marketing thing, right? And the FDA really slammed them for that, right? In India, of course, you can get away, but again, you can get away until you can get away, right? Suddenly, some guy will wake up, and that's when the problem starts, right? So, my recommendation as you're looking at building your business, make sure you do things right from day one onwards. Right. Of course, technical development absolutely has to have management oversight, right? Which means every aspect of what you do, right? Device medical history, right? Device history file, DHF, device records file, all QC processes. For example, just to give you a flavor of what it is, right? Um, for our medical devices company, we had to develop about 107 SOPs, right? That is a number, 107, right? That gives you an idea of the amount of control you need to have. And this 107 SOPs includes everything from what dress a resource has to wear in a lab, to how can they enter the lab, to how do you hire these resources, to how do you train these resources, to how do you track these resources, to how do you select vendors, to how do you qualify vendors, to how do you run your facility, what kind of water you use in a facility, what kind of how do I call it, building management systems you have in your facility. I mean, the whole gamut of things. right? They all fall under business process. So it's a lot of work, by the way, guys. So just just don't get hassled by it. But I think that's part of the game, right? If you choose to be in healthcare, especially in the medical device space, you have to have your socks pulled up. You have to be able to do it right the first time, and really requires you to start looking at it, start putting all those frameworks in place. Your quality manual is probably one of the first things you look at from a business strategy perspective, right? Get somebody who can help you build that quality manual. And then, from there starts your game, right? And the quality manual covers every aspect of your business, right? From sales to marketing to hiring to facility management to technical development to quality assurance to everything else. Okay, I think that's something to keep in mind. And if you see here, resource provision, again, the right resources for the right kinds of roles. Quality policy we talked about. What are the company objectives? How do the company objectives tie into quality policy? How do they tie into your product, right? So there is a something called IFU, right, which you actually send with your product. It's called instructions for use. So I think that's very critical. It's a very critical part of your product packaging, right? Strategic planning, again, that has to be critically reviewed. Why? Because what you plan in terms of what you want to do with your business has to be in alignment what uh, with what the regulation says. So that's something very, very important for you, right? Of course, design and all that, you guys may already know about it. Okay. Now, when you look at some of the other key artifacts you need to worry about, right, as I was saying, starts with records, right? What are some of the, so these records could be anything from, when you're building your device, you're going through your P0 or your P1 or whatever, right? All those notes which you've captured, they're all part of your records. Then you have your standard operating procedures, as I was saying. Then you have your master batch records. Then you have attachments, forms. I mean, forms for pretty much everything, right? Change control, managing change control, managing adverse reactions, your product recall SOPs, right? How are you going to do product recalls if you have to do that? Quality system SOPs. Then comes the policies and the quality manual, right? Some of the key artifacts you need to look at. Again, medical device file, MDF, absolutely key to have that in place. You need to have documents around general description of the product, intended use, as I was saying, purpose and labeling, including any instructions for specialized use, specialized conditions, specialized temperatures, specifications for product, specification or procedures for manufacturing, packaging, storage, handling, distribution, procedures for measuring and monitoring, and as appropriate, if your product is something which requires installation, then how do you install, post qualification, verification, servicing, a whole gamut of different things fall there, right? And largely, one of the good things and the bad things is that regulations dictate large parts of it, right? So if you're following, let's say, the EU MDR, or you're starting, of course, the ISO 13485 is kind of like a standard. You absolutely need to have that, right? Of course, if you're looking at the US, then it's a 21 CFR Part 820. If you're doing manufacturing, then again, you have the CGMP, CGLP, CGCP, a lot of different things to worry about. But what I mean is, in all of this, not to scare you guys, but say that do it right the first time. Don't postpone things for later, because later doesn't happen. We get caught up in running our business, in building our products, and we don't get time to do this, right? So my recommendation, allocate specific time for you to worry about ensuring documentation is right. Okay. So this is a stage gated commercialization model, right? So this is something I've kind of put together. So what this does is it breaks down the product, and it's stage gates, which means you first do this, then you move on to 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 this. Okay. So as I said, I've become very wise nowadays, right? I was not wise earlier, right? I was this really cool guy who wanted to do very cool things because I saw the technology to do it, right? So I started off by, so I was looking at IoT sensors, I was trying to do fall detection devices, things like that, about 12, 15 years back, right? And they were not even talked about in the marketplace. But that's when I quickly learned that, cool technology doesn't make any sense. Market has to tell you what they want. Market has to tell you what they like. And if you get that, then you're good, right? So that's why I think market forces is a key thing in your business model, right? The first thing. So one of the key things you have to do is you really need to figure out who's your customer, right? Sounds very simple. It's not, right? So when you look at who's your customer, this could mean, you could say, yeah, B2B is my customer, or my business model is a B2B2C, or my business model is a B2G, right, or whatever, right? That's bullshit, honestly. B2B is just a start of a pyramid, right? So what does B2B mean, right? What B2B means? Okay, business to business. So which business are you targeting, right? Are you targeting a Fortune 100 company? Are you targeting a Fortune 500 company? Are you targeting a Fortune 1000 company? Are you targeting an SME which is doing 1000 crores? Are you targeting an MSME which is doing 100 crores? Or are you targeting MSMEs which do less than 5 crores? Why? Because the story of how you sell to each one changes. You can't be telling the story of how great your product is to somebody who's, let's say, running a company whose top line is, let's say, 5 crores, and you're trying to sell him a product for, let's say, 1 lakh rupees. He's going to demand the earth and the moon for 1 lakh rupees because his thinking is 5 crores is a lot of money, right? That's his business. So 1 lakh is like his heart and his soul. And if you're going and if you're selling the same product to somebody who's working in a Fortune 100 company, he's going to look at you and say, 1 lakh? Others are selling for 1 crore. Why are you selling for 1 lakh? Is there something wrong with your product? Right? So that whole game plan changes. You guys have to really, really, really think through this, right? Who is my customer? Absolutely key. So my recommendation is try to look at your possible customer, figure out 10 facts about the customer, right? What will this customer look like? 10 facts, right? This could be something like, my customer is the owner of a MSME, right? Top line is 10 crores. My customer will have 20 employees working for him or her. My customer will have their own factory, for example. I don't know. My customer will be driving a four-wheeler car. Why? Because if your product is 1 lakh and you're going and selling to somebody who's driving a two-wheeler, that's not going to go, right? So 10 facts about your customer, right? Then next step, 10 verbs about your customer. What do verbs mean? This means my customer will be one who will be very adventurous in trying new products. My customer, for example, let's say you're trying to sell a healthcare information portal to somebody, right? Then you look for verbs like, my customer constantly wants to learn. My customer wants to be knowledgeable. My customer wants to be on top of his game by making sure he or she gets the best knowledge possible, things like that, right? Then you do 10 goals, 10 wishes and wants of the customer, right? So my customer will wish that he or she has access to the best medical inventions possible just in time. For example, let's say, right, if you're building a knowledge portal, let's say, right, my customer wishes that India is on top of the game as compared to other developed economies. I don't know. I'm just putting, so 10 wishes, right? Once you get the 10 facts, 10 verbs, 10 wishes and wants, you write that down, you make that into what could be what is called in business terms as a persona. Basically, it means you're drawing a picture of who your customer could potentially be, right? Once you do that, then you go and you talk to real people in the marketplace, right? Who probably fit into these three things, who fit into the facts, who fit into the verbs, who fit into the goals and wishes and wants. Then you validate and say, hey, I'm trying to build something like this. Would this be of interest to you? Right? If you had to look at something like this, would you be willing to pay money? If you wanted to look at something like this, will this be of value to you? What would be the features and things you would want in this product for you to actually pay money for transacting this with me, right? Those are the things you will have to do, which will end up giving you what is called a value proposition, right? You absolutely need to get your value proposition right. Otherwise, what happens today, and I know 94% of startups fail in India, by the way, right? And I know why, because I will go ahead, because I'm a cool guy. I don't know, I've studied in IIT Madras, so I've built this cool technology product. And because I've built this cool technology product, my customers will buy from me, is total bullshit. Will never happen, right? Customers will probably give you tea, coffee, a biscuit. Don't worry. Some people give you lunch also. It's happened to me, right? So I've gone. They were very nice and kind. Gave me lunch, everything. Then said, "We'll get back to you, sir." Over. Primarily because you're trying to sell them something which they don't want or they don't need, right? And this is why many startups fail. Many startups fail because they either run out of cash, but more because they run out of product market fit, right? Product market fit sounds so simple, but yet is very, very complex. If you get product market fit right, then your game is on. If you don't get it right, whatever you do, very difficult for the game to go, right? So, customer sounds like a very simple statement, is absolutely something you'll have to spend a lot of time figuring out. What is it, right? The next is the end user. Why? Because your end user may not be a customer. For example, if you're selling, let's say, um, CPAP machines, right? For example, your customer could be a hospital, but your end user could be a patient, right? So you really have to figure out what does that end user mean, right? The end user of my product? What kinds of pains, gains, jobs to do they have to worry about, right? And this is a process called empathy mapping, right? And customer journey mapping. These are all things, hopefully you've gone through the boot camp in the past sessions where they've covered it, because this is just one part of the business model per se, right? So, getting your customer, who's your customer, who's your end user, what is the jobs to do, right? So, when you look at jobs to do, and I'll tell you an interesting story, right? There was this company called Kimberly Clark, right? It's a US based company. I think they're in India too now, right? So they actually designed a blockbuster product at that time, right? The product was adult diapers, right? So they actually went ahead and made these diapers, and as they were making these diapers, they thought that this is going to be a $1 billion opportunity, primarily because so many senior citizens suffer from from incontinence, right? Which is the leaking of urine and things like that, because your bowel movements and things, the urinary bladder gets weaker as you get older. So this happens, right? So these guys thought they had a $1 billion product. They made the product and they kind of went into the market, and they found that the product failed miserably, right? They were wondering what's going on. This is a product which people need. We know senior citizens need this product. Why does this product not sell? From there came the concept of jobs to do, JTD, right? So there are three types of jobs which a product needs to fulfill, right? One is the functional part, right? Which is, let's say you make a CPAP machine. The CPAP machine is supposed to pump air so that the patient can breathe oxygen, can breathe better, right? That's the functional part. The second thing is So one is the functional aspect. The second is the emotional aspect, right? Emotion is making sure the CPAP machine doesn't look very complex or doesn't look like it's some very serious machine, right? It needs to be used in an ICU or whatever. Why? Because that gives the end user a feeling that he or she is in big trouble in terms of their health, right? The third aspect in terms of jobs to do is what is called social, right? There's a social angle to it. What does that mean? That means that if I'm using this product, right, I should not feel that I'm socially away from my day-to-day activities and things like that, right? It should merge as easily with the end user's lifestyle as possible. So what Kimberly Clark did was they ended up making a wonderful adult diaper, but then what they found was the diaper was very kludgy, as in it was big and thick, right? And when people started, end users started using them, they found it to be very inconvenient, right? It appeared to be bulging out most of the time, and it made them very socially conscious. It made them feel like they were patients or they were in poor health or they were not looked good or it didn't look good, right? So what Kimberly Clark did was they went back, they re-engineered the diaper, right? Made it like what it is today, right? Pull-up pants, and then they saw the market grow, right? So that's the criticality of your jobs to do. You guys absolutely have to spend time thinking through what does my product do in terms of solving an end user's pain or in terms of or in terms of providing an end user gain, right? And what does my product do from a functional perspective? What does it do from an emotional perspective? What does it do from a social perspective? These are key things you have to absolutely think through. Okay. Then comes your market size, right? Again, this is something to be very watchful of in India. I've seen that B2C models are extremely challenging, right? Because your ARPU, your average revenue per unit, is very low typically in B2C models. So you have to be really, really smart about how you kind of do this, right? Your market size is not typically, right? My recommendation is don't base it on, oh, in India there are, let's say, 1,800 hospitals. I am making a product for a hospital. So I look at 1% of 1,800, which is 180 hospitals. So I'll do the 1% model. Sounds good, very difficult to kind of execute. My recommendation is start from ground zero, right? Which means, let's say you have a concept, you go talk to 10 hospitals here, right? Go burn the tire on the road, so as to speak, right? Talk to them and say, hey, I have this product. Would you like to try this? Right. This is again if you are at the MVP stage, right? See what they think. That will give you a better estimate. If you talk to 10 hospitals, and six of them or seven of them think it's a good idea and they'd love to try that, then you've got some kind of a market size going for you, right? Then you can work up bottom up, right? So you can build from there and you say, okay, I've done an experiment with 10 hospitals, seven of them say it's good and they'd like to try it, which means in India I have 1,800, or in Bangalore I have, let's say, 200 hospitals. So maybe 70% of that could be my potential opportunity, right? That will be what is known as a total addressable market size, TAM, right? From TAM, then you work up what is known as a serviceable obtainable market, right? Which is because in that list of hospitals, you may have hospitals like Narayana Hridayalaya and Apollo and BGS, all who may actually be big, and they may already be using very sophisticated equipment. Let's say you're making a product which is a CPAP machine, right? They may not look at that. Then you, from there, you work your way down to what potential hospitals may not have this and may be looking for this, right? That's a serviceable, obtainable market. And from there, you'll work your market size, then you'll enter into the customer segment, right? Again, this is a very important piece for you guys as you think through. Why? Because each customer segment has its own value proposition, right? What does that mean? For example, I can tell you the story of how we made a product, right? It was a smart energy device, right? It used to measure electricity, but used to do it over a SIM card, right? And it also used something called power line technology, PLC, which means that you could actually use power lines to actually monitor, send data back and forth and things like that, right? So we made a product, right, which was costing us in terms of a bomb, cost us bill of materials, cost us about 1,700 rupees, right? And when we're selling it to the government, we sold it at 2,400 rupees, right? But when we're selling it to Shobha, right? Again, Shobha has mid-sized flats. Shobha has villas also, right? So for the mid-sized flats, we were selling at 12,000 rupees. Why? You take the product, you put a nice cover on it, right? Nice plastic glossy cover on it, and then it fits into that customer segment. Why? Because customer segments value proposition changes based on their needs and wants are different, right? So the villa guy, what we did was the same 1,750 meter. When we're selling to the Shobha villa guy, we were selling at 28,000 rupees. But then again, the product form changes. Why? Because their needs and wants are different. The villa guy wants to have a really cool top of the end device. He wants to see some graphs on his device, right? The end of the day is a power meter, right? So what we did was we went to Alibaba Express, we checked on it, we bought a what is known as a CDU, customer display unit, for 800 rupees. We bundled that along with this meter, and we said it's 28,000 rupees. And the Shobha guys loved it. Thing is, because each customer is a premium products. Some segment will want value products. Some segment will want functional value products. Some segment will want functional value products. So it's important that you do your homework around all this. Okay. Then comes the scope, right? So what does scope mean? Market scope, right? So whom am I going to sell this to, right? Am I going to sell this, let's say, in Bangalore? Am I going to sell this in Karnataka? Or am I going to sell it in Western Karnataka? Or am I going to sell it in South India? Or am I going to sell it in India? Or am I going to sell it in South Asia? Or am I going to sell it in Asia Pacific? Or am I going to sell it global, right? Because all this has implications on your business model. Why? Because again, value proposition, again, customers, end users, jobs to do, pains, gains, all that changes. So scope is very important. Then the next thing you look at is trends, right? Now, why do you think that today people, startups who throw in a buzzword like supervised learning or unsupervised learning or or machine learning or advanced machine learning or adaptive machine learning seem to be more heard from angels and venture capitalists than others, primarily because these are trends. And everybody knows if you follow a trend, then the chances are that people will look at you more closely than before. Not necessarily buy, but look at you more closely, right? So again, making sure that you're trending is a very important thing. For example, if today, right, you were to make a portable ECG machine, right, and say that it's a cutting edge technology, I will say go to hell. Why? Because I've seen portable ECG machines being built about 7 years back in India, right? So again, unless you're doing something wow, right? It's like going back to how Apple came in and how they dominated the market, right? Samsung and Nokia were ruling the market with these keyboard phones, right? Suddenly, Apple came from nowhere. It was a totally wow product design, right? Touch screen, all that other stuff, right? So again, if your product, right, is going to wow the customer, then you can beat the trend, right? Else you will be stuck, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Then the other thing to look at is competition, right? Again, when people look at competition, and this is something I've seen, right? Most startups who come to me will say, "Oh, there is no competition. I'm doing this. There's really nobody doing anything similar to me." No, not necessarily. That means you haven't done your homework, right? There are two different models which are at play also in competition. One is called substitutes, right? Which means who's doing something which can substitute your product, right? Today the work is getting done. How is it getting done? That's probably a substitute. So is your product better than the substitute, right? In terms of functional, in terms of social, in terms of emotional aspects, right? Then the other is complementer. Complementers are people who have products which probably does maybe half of what you do, of your product, right? They can quickly scale up too, right, to do the full product. So those are all your competition you need to look at, not just direct, indirect competition, but also complementers and substitutes, right? And there are some frameworks which I really, really recommend you guys look at using, especially when you're mapping out market forces, right? Obviously, start off with your SWOT, right? Your strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats model. Then there's something called the 3C model. This means customer, competition, and cost, right? So how does this all map out, right? Then you can another framework to look at using is called the value proposition canvas, which actually defines why your product will sell in the marketplace, why your product is something the customer really anticipates and wants to buy, right? It will also tell why your product is going to kick the competition on the back, right, on the rear, right? And for value proposition, before that, you'll obviously needs to do what is known as an empathy mapping exercise, right? So hopefully you guys have done this. If you've not done this, I sincerely recommend you go and do this, because without knowing what value your product is going to deliver, without knowing what value your product is going to deliver, which is what the customer wants to hear, you can't be going and selling. People will not buy, even though you may be very knowledgeable about what you're trying to do. You may be very knowledgeable about the market. You really don't know what's in the mind of your prospective customers, right? So these kinds of tools help you get there. There's another framework called pestle, right, which I recommend you guys look at using, right? What it does is it gives you a map. It's more of used to study the state of the industry, if you will, right? It's called political, economic, social, technology, legal, and environmental, right? That's pestle. So it'll help you study each part of it, right? So for example, let's say you're launching a air purifier product, right? Political will actually look and see, hey, is the government supportive of your product, like, are there laws being passed around air purity, are there any kind of conditions being put by the government in terms of what purifiers can be sold, things like that, right? So like that you'll map out each one of the key factors around that, right? So that's the market forces. Once you've done all this, right, if you've done all this and looks good and you get a tick, right, then you're ready to go to the next technical feasibility. If you've done all this and you're finding that no, the market isn't very supportive, then you either decide not to do it or you decide to pivot, which means you change the idea, right, in terms of what you want to do, right? Now let's assume that you've done all this exercise, you think it's good to go, you got the value proposition, you found out what the jobs to do is, you found out what the pains gains are, you got an idea of who your end customer segment is, you got an idea of of what the market size is, you also know who's your end user. Then you move into what is known as the tech feasibility stage, right? And by the way, as engineers, right, most of us will start here. Most of us will build a tech product, then we will go and see who to sell it to, then we will examine all this, right? Then we will look at all this, right? And that's where we get into trouble, right? Anything you do, you first start off with what is the market, what is the customer going to look like. If you do that, you will be successful. I guarantee it, honestly. But it's a lot of hard work, by the way, right? It's not no easy shakes, right? All right. So then tech feasibility, right? In tech feasibility, what will you do? You look for ecosystem readiness, right? Is the ecosystem ready for a product like mine? What does that mean? For example, let's say I'm building a, let's say a CPAP machine, right? And it's a cool CPAP machine. It uses IoT. It can connect. It can send data to the cloud. It can do all kinds of funky things, right? And I built this. It can do machine learning. It can pull data from, let's say, from the, let's say, the ventilator machine, things like that. Now, when I take it to the market, what I mean by ecosystem readiness is, right? Are hospitals ready? Let's say my target segment is a hospital. Then I'll go and say, are hospitals ready to do IoT stuff, right? Are the ventilators there IoT enabled, right? Otherwise, there's not much value with my product, right? What else is going on, right? So that's what is known as the ecosystem readiness, right? Is the ecosystem ready for something like mine, right? And what can trigger that is, for example, COVID, right? When COVID kicked in, right, it triggered off an ecosystem readiness for online training, for online schools, for online education, things like that. Right? Before that, if you had a product which would do online, you would have your own customers, but the ecosystem wasn't ready for it. Right? Today, there's a large scale adoption going on. That's what it means. Right? Then integration. This is again what I talked about, right? So you build a cool product, but if it doesn't integrate, let's say, with the existing hospital equipment management system, then what's the point, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Adaptability, right? So will my product be adaptable? In India, right? And this is something we had to do, for example, and this is an interesting exercise, right? So our product, right? As I was telling, the point of care medical device, right, looks for ambient light, right? Because what it does is it's more like a it uses lateral flow assays, and it uses chemical luminescence to actually do disease prediction, right? So there's a calibrated strip. Then there's another strip where you test strip where you put a drop of blood, and then you allow the blood to react with your buffer and things like that, and then you do a comparison in terms of images, right? Now, for the images comparison to happen, ambient light is needed, right? And it worked perfectly well in most places. Then when we went to a PHC, a primary health center in rural Karnataka, right? We found that the PHC was located in a very dark room, right? And the doctor was sitting there. And then we found that our product quickly wouldn't work because the ambient light in that room did not map up to what our product looks at ambient light, which means our product was not adaptable, right? So what we ended up doing was we ended up building what was known as a light box, honestly. So the mobile phone fits into the light box, and there's an LED light which gets switched on, so it simulates ambient light, right? So that's an example of adaptability, right? Then cost. Again, this is something to be very smart about, right? As a as a business model, what I have seen is, right. So, and again, I'll tell you our story, right? So our product, which is a mobile phone along with this light box, so we give the phone free, right? We give that kit free, and we only charge for the strips, right? It's almost like your Gillette shaving razor model, right? So you need not, so when you're thinking through your business model, right, you need not always think about this is the cost of my product and this is how I will sell, right? Today, many of the healthcare ecosystem how do I call it, players look for different kinds of models around optimizing cost. They prefer more of an OPEX kind of model than a CAPEX model, right? They prefer paying a subscription. So, for example, let's say you're entering into the marketplace, right? You got a product, right? You're entering into the marketplace. One of the other things I would do is I would go and see if somebody already has a similar system in place, but you want them to try it, right? You go and you say, hey, I'm doing a freemium model for you, right? I'm going to give this free. I'm going to set it up for you free. What you should allow me is, if this works well, you should allow me to do marketing with you, as in give me the rights to have you certify that yes, this machine was installed here, it worked well, it did this, and you will give me a customer testimonial, and you will give me two other customer references, right? That's some of the creative ways you look at working out cost, right? Cost need not be necessarily in rupees, right? Cost could also be in terms of bartering, in terms of leveraging, right? Because if let's say you put this machine to your customer prospect, and he doesn't pay you money, but yet he gives you two or three good references for you, and calls and tells them, yes, this product is good, isn't that worth the money? Right, so that's the way you should look at it, right? So when you're looking at commercialization models, be very flexible on it, right? Another thing you could do is you could say, hey, I'll give you the first 6 months free, right? But the next 6 months, once you see value, then you start paying on it, right? And the payment you'll pay on it will probably cover your first 6 months. Again, that's a little bit of math, but I think that's something you can look at, right? Another thing is around IP. Right? Of course, within cost, when you're looking at, and we'll talk through that in supply chain. Another thing is around IP, right? I meet a lot of people who are so hung up on their IP, right? So they say, "Oh, it's too confidential. I can't talk about this. I can't talk about that." In my opinion, ideas are a commodity, right? Many people are thinking through the same idea. It's all about execution. It's all about execution, believe me. And that's one of the big reasons why even venture capitalists and angels don't sign NDAs. Well, they sign NDAs, but you know what? NDAs don't hold water. That's something I found out, right? So when I was building a product, this was in the smart energy space, right? We did an NDA. We found somebody else, a Chinese company, took our idea and copied it. We went to the court and we filed that, and this was in 2017, right? And the court told us that they're doing IP cases of 2012 August at that point in time. This was in September of 2017, which means the courts are 5 years behind, right? So what does IP do for you is something to think about, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that don't do it, because IP does have value, right? Because when investors look at it and you say you have IP, then there's a different valuation for it, right? Which they put. But all I'm saying is don't do IP just for the sake of doing IP, right? So that's something you have to think through in your business model. Then traction, right? So if I'm able to get traction, will my technology scale? That's something to think through, right? Then comes your MVP. What should your MVP be? Right? What kind of features should it have? Should it not have? Again, that comes from the jobs to do. That also comes from your customer. That also comes from a value proposition canvas, right? Then some of the other things you'll need to think about is scaling up models, right? For example, we ran into problems, right? We actually had our vendors in China, right? Who are actually making light boxes and things like that. And we ran into problems because when COVID kicked in, many of these places shut down, right? So that's something for you to think about, right? In terms of supply chain, in terms of manufacturing, right? And this is something I'll also be talking about in the next session, which is around design for manufacturing. One of the key things you have to look at when you're looking at manufacturing is try to see if you can reduce the number of parts which are needed in your system, right? It's absolutely critical, Right. Again, why? Because if you do a good design for manufacturing, then your assembly becomes easier. Managing your supply chain becomes easier. Right. Simple things. Right. For example, injection molds. Right. And let's say this is you're making your product is a product. It has a mechanical design, so you need to do injection molds. Today, if you do an injection mold in Bangalore, it will cost anywhere from, I don't know, from maybe 14 to 16 lakhs to maybe about 40 lakhs, depending on complexity. The same injection mold, if you try doing it in Delhi, will cost from, I don't know, 3 lakhs to 5 lakhs or 3 lakhs to 6 lakhs. The same if you go and you do in Gujarat, it'll again cost you 3 lakhs to 7 lakhs, right? So again, thinking through what your supply chain, what your manufacturing strategy is going to be is very critical. And there are also 3D manufacturers today, right? Quite a few of them are there. Again, looking at and seeing, for my MVP, do I really need to do an injection mold model, or can I do a 3D manufacturing model, right? Or not, right? Those are some things you need to think about in terms of your business strategy, right? Once you've done all this, right, tech feasibility, and you say yes, so you've now done market, you've done tech, then again, if tech doesn't work, again, you have to either decide to drop it or to do a pivot, right? If let's say things look good there, then you move on to idea viability, right? This is again around market economics, right? Economics. This is economics is about I'm going to spend X amount of money. Will I get X plus delta or not? Right? It's as simple as that. Right? It's about financials, right? How much money do I need? Again, planning for emergencies, because emergencies will happen in startups. They will absolutely happen. So even, and I can tell you stories of how investors said, yes, this looks good, we're going to sign on the term sheet. Well, in fact, some of them signed the term sheet and then walked away, right? Because a term sheet is a term sheet. There is no legal binding paper on that, right? They can just walk away also, right? And due to many things, due to actually one investor from Singapore, he signed the term sheet and he walked away. And we didn't understand why. He flew all the way from Singapore to Bangalore. He spent a day with us in the hotel opposite the airport, right? The Marriott there. So we spent time there, and then he flew back the same evening, spent all that money, signed the term sheet, and then he walked away. Why? Because some of his wealth tanked in the London Stock Exchange. So things happen, right? And as a model, right, as a business model, you have to be planned for that. What that means is, let's say I'm going to be running out of money in the 9 months. I start talking to people from today to start preparing for that, right? To start raising the next round of money, so that when I get to the seventh month, I've already signed up people, and I've got a runway further established, right? That's critical. Then funding, right? Again, funding is a double-edged sword, right? Why? Because everybody wants the best part of what they have, right? So investors will want as large a piece of the company as possible. And business startup founders and other entrepreneurs will want to hold as much company as possible with them, right? And there are many different options to look at in funding. I'm sure Saroj would have covered it, but I'll talk about a few, right? When you don't know what your valuation is, right? When you don't know how much value your company has, right? My recommendation is look for either grants, right? You have a lot of these grants, right? Karnataka Elevate, this, that big grant, this grant, that grant, right? Look for grants, or look for what is known as convertible debt, right? Convertible debt is a model whereby an investor will kind of give you like a loan, right, for a certain amount of time with a certain amount of interest. And if within that certain amount of time you're not able to pay the money back, then the investor has the right to convert that money into equity. What that does for you as an entrepreneur is it allows you not to give away parts of your company without knowing how valuable your company is, right? And if you believe your product is really, really good, then bite the bullet and say, my product is good. I've done all this work. I've studied the market. I've done my tech feasibility. So I will take money on a loan and then I will still hold large parts of company with myself, right? That's an idea to think about, right? I'm not saying do it. I'm just saying keep that in mind. Another thing to think about is risk, right? There are many risks, right? Well, I typically say focus on what is known as deal killer risks, right? Deal killer risks are, for example, I have 4-member team. Um, One of the members is this artificial intelligence machine learning guy, and our product is 80% artificial intelligence machine learning, right? And my that person is really upset. That's a deal killer risk, right? How do you handle him or her is a deal killer risk. Another deal killer risk is I am building an, let's say, an EHR product, right? And I'm going to be going and selling it to let's say hospitals, but my EHR product is not majorly different from what's available in the marketplace. That's a deal killer risk. Right? Like that, my recommendation is have a very clear risk management strategy in place. And you break that risk management strategy into 4 pieces: people, customers, finance, and internal, right? As in process, right? And map all that out. It's very, very critical to map risks out, right? And have either a risk mitigation strategy or say that I'm going to bite the bullet. But again, make sure you know what you're going to bite, right? Very critical to do that. Then time, right? So this is another thing, so I've invested in a few medical device companies here and there, right? So one of the companies which I invested in, this was about three and a half years back, is a company which has an Indian Institute of Science professor on it, and a few doctors and a technology guy on it, right? And they've been working on a neonatal hearing device, let's call it that. I mean, this is for small children, newborn children, to actually detect auditory um, issues, right? Whether they can hear, they cannot hear, things like that. And these guys were supposed to be making a really cool device. This was 3.5 years back, right? So I put in some money, and they were supposed to have the device ready in about 8 months, 9 months, right? 8 months came and went. We didn't see anything. Then it became a year, didn't see anything. And after 3 years, last week they say they have a prototype ready, and I'm like, go to hell, because 3 years later, you now have so many people who have similar products, right? So again, when you're looking at idea viability, you have to look at how much time is it going to take for your product concept to materialize, right? Ideally speaking, if you're planning, if you need a lot of time, then your product really, really needs to be out there, as in really, really cutting edge, right? Then you have the how do I call it, you have the flexibility of time on your hands, right? Then another thing to look at is regulations, right? As I was telling you guys, uh, regulations can make or break you, right? And I've worked in organizations where the FDA came and audited and issued what was known as a 483, right? And this was a fairly large company, right, doing about 150 million. When the FDA came and issued you a 483, you have to shut down the company the same day, right? That's the stringency of the regulation, right? So make sure that you subscribe to, you look at all the regulations, right? I've always played on the space that if you are making something and you're not sure if it needs to be a medical device or a wellness device, you have to look at the regulations and time and risk and see if it's worth it to be a medical device, or should it just be a wellness device, right? and study the regulations associated with it. Right? Very important to do that. I know today the CDCSO has said all documentation, class one, class two, class three, everything is online and things like that. But still is a heartache. You really have to grind your way through it. Quite a few consultants are there, Emorgo and BFS and all that. They're fairly expensive chaps. So as a small company, really think through this very carefully. Regulations is something you have to absolutely spend time thinking through. Okay. Then the legal issues, right? This could be as simple as as worrying about where your data resides, right? So I don't know if you guys know, but the Indian government recently has taken almost a photocopy of the European MDR regulations, right? Of the GDPR, sorry, and they've said this is going to be the regulations which come into play in India, right? Of course, industry has raised a lot of issues around that, but if that comes, that's going to be a serious headache. Why? Because according to that, it says data which is captured in India should reside in Indian servers, right? Which means AWS, Azure, all those things you have to really check and make sure that those servers are located in India or not, right? Then again there's different classifications they have. For example, if you're capturing data on past medical history, then that becomes a serious classification, right? So things like that, you guys have to make sure that you cover the legal aspects properly, right? It's a very different thing from any other business, right? Healthcare, medical devices, legal regulations take on a very large piece of the puzzle, right? If I had an opportunity, I would see if I could get a good lawyer as an advisor on my team, give him a 1%, 2% equity, and have him there so that you're safe from all of this, right? Then the other thing to look at is business models. What does this mean? This means if you're running a business, right, you don't necessarily need to run it in isolation, right? You can look at partnership models. You can look at reseller models. You can look at how do I call it? You can look at complementors to partner with. You can look at substitute startups to partner with, right? Do different things, right? And again, as I was saying, selling a product is not the only way to go, right? Leasing, subscription based, premium models, giving it away free but charging for, I don't know, subscription, right? Those are all monetization things, right? Giving the product free but saying, hey, if you want my database, you'll have to pay me money, right? Or giving my let's say I have a website, giving content of my website free but saying I need syndication, or I need the publicity for this, things like that, right? Many ways in which you can actually work up different kinds of business models, right? And as an entrepreneur, I think it's really important for you, given that you have a limited pool of money, to see how well you can leverage your connections, how well you can leverage things so that you get best value for your money, right? I think that's important to do, right? Okay, starting to lag, going off video. Then again, partnerships, right? The opportunity to build partnerships, right? So for example, and this is something we did successfully, right? Since we were in the space of TSH, right? We partnered with one of the largest thyroid companies in the world, right? And through them we reached out to, and this model, right, especially for medical devices, healthcare, you need to build what is known as a KOL model, right? It's called a knowledge opinion leader model, right? Which means you need to build credibility by associating with somebody who's knowledgeable and who can be an opinion leader in the marketplace, right? So what we ended up doing was we ended up signing a quasi partnership with the president of the Indian Thyroid Society, right, to sell our product, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Partnerships can make or break a business model, right? Very key. Again, marketing, right? When you're looking at marketing, it's not one size fits all. It's based on your market segment, it's based on your end user, it's based on your customer, right? Your marketing story will have to change, right? As I was telling you, if I'm going to go and sell to a Fortune 100 customer, my marketing and my messaging will have to be different than if I'm going and selling to, let's say, an MSME whose top line is, let's say, 10 crores. Right? The story absolutely has to change. So why? Because their needs and wants and jobs to do are totally different, right? Most of the time, right? Then again, you have to look at resources. So who are the resources I will need? How will I need them? Right? What are my needs for the next 6 months? What are my needs for the next 1 year? What are my needs for the next 2 years? Right? Resources could not just mean people, could also mean money, could also mean office space, could also mean many different things, right? Then team, right? Again, what are the core skills I need to have on my team, right? Without which the risk in my business will be significantly high. I need to get those people on one way or another, right? So once you're done with the idea viability, right? So now you've got the market. This is the external piece. You've got the technology. You've got the idea. Then you move into the business validation phase, right? Which is again product development, if you want to call it that, right? Where you start now meddling around and you say, I'm going to, do I build a prototype, right? What would be the prototype looking like, right? Again, remember when I told you about doing the value proposition, right? You would have built the value proposition canvas based on customers facts, needs and wants, and verbs, right? So you now look at the top three or top four features from the value proposition, and that most likely becomes your prototype. That's how you actually work through. So logically linked, if you will. Then you look at aesthetics, right? Today, fortunately or unfortunately, right? How the product form looks is critically important, right? So for example, let's say you're building a healthcare portal, how your reporting and visualization looks determines everything, right? And I think that's very, very key. So make sure you look at the UX. You first look at the UE, the user engineering part of it, then you look at the UX part of it. And I think they're very, 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 very critical components, especially for medical devices, especially for healthcare. Why? Because unlike other businesses, your customers, right, if they are doctors, you're dealing with a very highly professional person. You're dealing with somebody who's extremely knowledgeable. So you can't just go give them a box or a contraption or a black box. It has to look good, it has to do what it says it does, right? Because you're selling to a very knowledgeable how do I call it, decision maker, if you want to call it that, right? Then again, figuring out field trials. Again, this is if you're looking at medical devices, then you have to now think through, okay, so I'm going to have to do some field trials. Who do I partner with? Do I partner with St. John's Medical Research? Do I partner with NIMHANS? Do I partner with GenServe's JJS, whatever, right? Who do I partner with for my field trials? How do I put the institutional review board up template together? What do I need to do? What should be my standards? What should be my controls? How do I do my sensitivity specialty testing? What should be my gold standard comparison? These are all very key things you have to think through. you know then comes your build, measure, learn loop, right? This is again as part of your prototype, right? As you're going through it, you'll start off with your CAD drawings, you'll go show it to people, get feedback, come back, make the CAD drawings better, go show it, then probably do a 3D model, build one piece, two piece, go show it, come back, then slowly start figuring out, do I now look at doing 3D for another more pieces, or do I now look at investing in an injection mold or what, right? Those are all critical things you'll have to do, and that's part of your build, measure, learn loop, right? Which you have to go through. right? Then you do your finalizing of your product form, right? And in all of this, you keep your quality management systems, your regulatory standards in mind, right? Because unlike in other businesses, right, here in the medical device healthcare space, you also have to keep track of your product post market as well, right? So you have a pre market approval, then you have the product going into the market, and you need to track all the products performance as part of your adverse reactions database and things like that, right? Again, depends on your device classification, but again, you'll have to look at your regulatory standards assessment to figure that part out, right? So quality plays a key role in all these steps, and you literally are guided or directed by what regulatory compliance you kind of subscribe to. Absolute critical piece. Once you're done with all of this, right, then you go into the execution mode, right? This is where you now look at manufacturing, right? Do I manufacture in Korea? Do I manufacture in Taipei? Do I manufacture in Guangdong? Do I manufacture in Shanghai? Do I manufacture in Karnataka? Do I manufacture in Gujarat? Do I manufacture in Pondicherry? Do I manufacture in Noida, NCR, or where? Right? Very critical part, because why? Depending on how you're playing the game, right, that cost could take up anywhere upwards of 30, 35%, 40%, or even 70% of the cost of your product, right? So making sure your manufacturing strategy is clearly defined, I think, is a very, 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 very key part of the game, right? Again, this is if you're in that space, right? If you're building medical devices, channel management is also a very critical piece, right? This means, are you going to hire your own sales force? Are you going to be doing direct to consumer selling, D2C, right? Or are you going to do selling via a retail channel? Or are you going to do a selling via a distributor channel? If you're doing a distributor channel, what should be your sales force looking like? Do you need a sales force? How do you need to influence them, right? Then again, you'll have to then map out, for example, your distributor becomes one of your customers, right? If you're going the distributor route, then you have to sit and figure out, what would my ideal distributor like? What would be the facts about that distributor? What would be the verbs which define that distributor? What would be the wishes and wants of that distributor, right? Again, you'll build a value proposition canvas for that distributor, because end of the day, he's going to be kind of like your customer, right? Because only if he's enthused and he believes your product is good, will he push that product as compared to a competitor's product. Then you look at your distribution channel, right? How do I want to look at distributing this, right? Do I now do a partnership arrangement, right? Do I do an Amazon thing? Do I do a Flipkart thing? Do I do a seniorsindia.com thing? Whatever, right? Do I do a netmeds thing, right? Many different options present themselves, right? Then comes your product marketing, right? Putting all those brochures together, making sure that your statements are clear, making sure you don't have any negligence in terms of what your product says it will do and what it does, and making sure it stays clear of any regulatory oversight, things like that, right? Then building your sales channel, right? Looking at key opinion leaders, right? So for example, going back, if I'm doing my CPAP machine, right, then I will look at it and say, okay, I need to go talk to, let's say, the top chest disease experts and get one or two of them on board. Maybe I need to go and talk to the Indian Institute of Respiratory Diseases, or I need to go to the Indian Association of Respiratory Experts and see if they can brand my product. Maybe I can do a partnership agreement with them, things like that. Then the next step you need to think through is your service model, right? How will I service my product? This is where many people fall apart. I can tell you without naming, there are some of the top Indian medical device companies who built some really good product and who got some awards, many awards, things like that, have really failed in terms of their services. You go talk to doctors who supposedly use the product, they say this is an absolute waste of our time, right? So service is a very key part of your business model. How will you service it? Will you use your own people? Will you outsource the service? Will you do a combination of both? How does that all come together? Very important part of the model, right? Of your business model. Branding. How do you brand your product, right? Again, it depends on who your customer is, right? Again, if you want to, as I was telling you, right, if you're looking at a Shoba builder's villa which costs 5 crores, the branding will be different. It will be a super cool, like a uh, like an extraterrestrial device. If you're selling it to the government, it can be like a simple power meter, right? It all depends on your customer segment and who you're selling it to. Then comes your warranties. This becomes very critical, especially in medical devices, right? Because there are negligence issues, right? Is it warranted negligence, unwarranted negligence, right? So what does that mean? That means, let's say I have a CPAP machine, right, and I use a very poor quality power cord for that, right? And that is a how do I call it? That is a non negligence, right? But let's say I use a good quality power cord, but then I don't give in the instructions for you stating that this device should be kept away from bodies of water in the house, or this device should not be touched with wet hands, right? That is again an issue, right? So training, and how do people have to use this product? Um, how do end users have to use this product? Is there any conditions, optimum operating conditions for this product? Right. Now, of course, there are some insurance options also available. It's still not caught on in India, but abroad there are insurances available for things like this. Right. Then, how do you manage the regulatory process? So, for example, let's say a product has a problem, God forbid, you have to do a product recall. How would that process work? Right. You should have an SOP for that. Today, I think many medical devices are being asked to have what is known as a UID, right? A universal ID. So that product recall makes it easier, right? So how do you even name your product? How do you identify your product? Do you keep the batch number? Do you keep the lot number? Do you keep the date? What do you do? So that product recall makes it better, right? So these are some things you have to absolutely keep in mind, right? This is the stage gated commercialization model. So the thought process here is you go from an idea to build an MVP, build the MVP. Then, if it's good, you get good feedback from the market, then it's good. Otherwise, you optimize it. Then you go, the market wants it. That should be the way. The market should pull your product. Once the market pulls your product, then you move into tech push, which is you use digital marketing and other things to kind of build on from there on. Right? That is the broad thought process around commercialization models. Right? So this is one aspect of a model, right? Now this is, so what I've covered. This is the business canvas, if you will, right? What it does is it's a one pager which provides you an idea of what and all you want to do in your business, right? So where you'll start from is you'll start from the value proposition. What do you do, right? And this value proposition, as I told you, comes from knowing your customer, knowing his or her needs, knowing what they want, knowing facts about them, knowing what the pains your product is going to address, knowing what gains they are going to get out of using the product, knowing what jobs to do is going to happen with the product, right? Then from here, you'll actually map out the customer segment, right? Who are you looking at helping in terms of your product? Then you'll map out how do you interact. Then you'll map out how do you reach. Then you'll map out what do you need. Then you'll map out what are the activities you'll need to get done. Then you'll map out key partners. Then you will map out what will it cost for you to do. Then you will map out how much will you make, right? So the business canvas is a simple model you can use to make sure you put all aspects of your business strategy in one paper, right? It looks simple. It's a lot of work you need to do. If you do that, I think you'll be in good footing. Another way to look at the business model is this way, right? What so value proposition? What value do we deliver to the customer? Which one of our customers' problems are we helping to solve? What bundles of product and services are we offering to each customer segment? Which customer needs are we satisfying? That's why I said, so a millionaire will have a different need as compared to a middle class customer, right? So which needs are we satisfying, right? What is the minimum viable product, right? This comes another value proposition. Then you move to the customer segment. For whom are we creating value, right? So different customers have different value propositions. Who are our most important customers? What are the customer archetypes? This is the persona, right? What I talked about. Then you will say, how do we keep grow our customers if we had to do that? Which customer relationships have we established? How are they integrated with the rest of the business model? How costly are they? So there is something called CAC, right? It's called customer acquisition cost. And that's why I say in B2C in India is very expensive, right? Why? Because capturing the cost, the CAC for a retail customer is very high. You need to spend more money than anywhere else getting a customer in India as compared to getting a customer, let's say, in developed economies, right? So how costly are they in terms of acquiring? I think is very important for you to think about, right? Then once you think through that, then you think about through which channels do our customer segments want to be reached, right? So for example, this, how do you know that? This, you know that by studying the pains, gains, jobs to do of the customer segment, right? They will tell you, I wish my product could be sold at home. I wish my local grocery shop sells this kind of product. I hope that if there is a problem, the company will come and pick up the device from my home and take it back for repair, right? Things like that, right? So through which channels do our customer segments want to be reached? How do other companies reach them now, right? Again, one good thing which I do is do what is known as comparative analysis. What this means is, this means you go and you study companies who are in a similar segment like yours and see what they've been doing. How do they reach out to customers? How do they fulfill service obligations? How do they sell? Do they sell direct? Do they sell via distributors? Do they sell retailers? What do they do? Right? It's a good way to learn. Which channels work best? Which channels are most cost efficient? How are we integrating them with customer routines, right? So customers have a certain way. See, we're all human beings, right? So we have a certain set of things we will do most of the time, right? And most of the time they will be very predictable things, right? So how does your product integrate with a customer's way of life, right? And that comes as part of an exercise you will do called customer journey mapping, right? If you've not done that, I highly recommend you look at doing that, right? Then you will move here, right? You will say, what key activities do our value propositions require to do, right? What are our distribution channels? How do we build customer relationships? What will be our revenue streams, right? Identifying that. Then you will go into what key resources do our value propositions require? What resources do our distribution channels require? What do we need to do to manage our customer relationships? What do we need to do to manage our revenue streams, right? Then you will go and you look at partners. You'll say, who are our key partners? Who should be our key partners, right? Should the Indian Medical Association be a key partner? Should, maybe, I don't know, if let's say I'm making a device for let's say I'm making a 5 lead device, ECG portable device. Should Dr. Devi Shetty be my partner, right? Or should Narayana Hidalaya be my partner, right? Who are our key suppliers? Again, when you look at suppliers, right, one of the things you should do is you should do what is known as an ABC level categorization, right? Which means a category suppliers are very critical for your product. If there's a problem with them, then you're screwed, right? Which means then you should have a business continuity plan for your A level suppliers. Then you have a B level suppliers and your C level suppliers, right? Which key resources are we acquiring from our partners, right? Which key activities do partners perform for us? Having that clearly outlined. For example, let's say you're getting a doctor on board, then what do you do? So what should the doctor do for you, and what will you do for him or her, right? Having that clearly defined is very key. Then comes your cost structure, right? What are my most important costs in my business model, right? Typically, medical device costs, if you make it in India, are fairly high, right? So you will only be able to get good gross margins if you scale, right? So how do you manage that? What should you be doing, right? How do those most important costs get managed? Is there an opportunity where, let's say, for example, I can, if the supplier is a very key supplier for me, could I partner with them and could I tell them, hey, you know what, you provide me some flexible payment options, and I'll provide you 5% of the profit I make, or I give you 1% of equity in my company, whatever, right? You can work up different models to manage costs, right? Which key resources are most expensive? Which key activities are most expensive? Again, which key resources are least expensive? I need to look at both, right? And I need to have a good mix of them, right? Then I will look at revenue streams. For what value are our customers really willing to pay, right? Very key aspect. In India today, if you ask me, if you give things free, everybody loves it, right? Especially the small business guys, right? They will want everything free, right? Then how do you manage your business, right? Is there a way whereby you can give that free but yet get them to connect you with more customers, or you maybe they give you customer testimonials, or maybe they help you do free marketing, whatever, right? So figuring that part out, right? Why is this important, right? Because your break even analysis will depend on what value your customers are looking at paying for your product or service, right? That will determine how long before you actually break even or not, right? Then for what do they currently pay, right? So today, what is the status today, right? If let's say you have a product or service which intends to either better a product or service which exists, what are they paying today, right? How much more will they pay for your product or service, right? What is the revenue model? As I said, is it a subscription model? Is it a leasing model? Is it a barter model? What is it, right? What are the pricing tactics? As I was saying, your price elasticity is also a very key thing, right? So you can look at keeping your price elastic. So why do you think a bottle of water in a five-star hotel costs X and a bottle of water in a roadside shop costs Y, right? Why do you think chocolates, the same chocolate probably, which is maybe sold in let's say a mall, is more priced higher than a chocolate which is sold, let's say, in a roadside shop? Right? Those are all pricing tactics, right? So, and there are different models in terms of how you can manage your price, right? My recommendation is, there's a book which is free, right? And I've written it. It's called the Top 60 Decision Making Frameworks for Startups, right? My recommendation is you go download it. It's available on, I think, Amazon, right? And that will give you a lot more frameworks, right? If you're looking at frameworks per se, if you have not used it, that is, right? If you used it, then don't worry about it. If you have not used it, then there are many different models for how do you manage pricing, how do you manage your business models, how do you manage your product design, how do you manage your value proposition. I mean, a whole bunch of different stuff. Okay, so that gives you a flavor of business models, right? And there is an Excel. I'm not going to go through this per se, but there is an Excel spreadsheet which you guys must have, right? Is that part of the book, guys? Jinsar, guys? Yes,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is a part of the.
it's part of the book, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
so this Excel spreadsheet, right, will give you the questions which I've actually talked about, right? What is the product you have? What is the value proposition? What customer segment does your market serve? How do you reach out to your customer segment with a product or service, right? How do you intend to interact with your customer? What key resources you need to make your offerings a success in the marketplace? What are the key activities you need to do to make your offerings available in the market to the right customer segment? Who are the partners you would need to ensure that your offering is available in the market segment? What does your cost structure look like? How much money will you make from an offering from the defined segment, right? And you can actually use these templates just as a matter of exercise for yourself. Okay, so I've even given data around how, let's say you have a SaaS model, how you would do it. If you have an e-commerce model, how you would do it. And if you have a two-sided market model, how you would look at doing it. A whole bunch of different things, right? And as I was saying, calculating your customer acquisition cost, I think, is a very key part of it, right? And why I say that is because when you're running a business, you need to know how much money I need to spend on my product. More importantly, you need to know how much money I need to spend on selling my product so that the customer gives me more than what it costs me to make the product and sell it. Okay. So I think that's a very key part of the puzzle. And my recommendation is I think you should spend as much time as possible looking at the business model, because without the business model, you're not going to go anywhere, right? Why? Because without a customer, there is no business. It's as simple as that. Okay. So now I'm going to quickly go through this quickly. You guys are able to see this on the screen?
Yes, sir. I mean, the
Yes.
screen is visible.
Yes. Okay. Okay, good. So this is something I have developed as a framework, right? So my recommendation is you guys look at using this. It primarily breaks it down into four buckets, if you will, right? So my business has a challenge, right? Either you're doing a product launch, or there's a challenge in terms of profitability, or I'm not sure what to do, right? Then what you do is you look at these pieces, right?
Mr.
You look
Anand,
at,
sorry to
yes.
interrupt, but what do you expect us to see? What we see is a PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, you still see the PowerPoint.
Yes.
That's why I asked, do you see it? Okay. No, this I'm showing something else. How do I now show that? Mhm. Do I do a stop share? Okay, let's try that. Okay, do you see this?
Yes, I see business situation analysis.
Yeah,
Looks
yeah.
more
Okay, got it. Yeah. So this is a very specific framework. This is, let's say you have a challenge, right? You either have a product where you've launched and you're not seeing the profits, or you plan to launch a product, then what you should do, right? So this is a framework I've built. Um, so there are a few key tools you'll need to use, right? There is something called the ANSOF matrix. You'll need to look at using that. It's available on Google. You can Google and search on that. There's something called Porter's Five Forces. It's again a framework. There's something called PESTEL, which we spoke about, right? BCG is the Boston Consulting Group metrics. They will help you with some of these, capturing some of these data points, right? So what you will need to do is you'll need to capture four buckets: customer data, product data, organizational data, competition, right? When you're looking at customer data, as I said, who's the customer, right? The segment, trends in terms of customer data, percentage market share they have, if you will. What are the needs and wants of the customer segment? What are the price points which each segment is willing to pay? What are the natural partners and preferred distribution channels? What does that mean? That means, let's say I'm making a point of care device for thyroid. My natural partner will be the Indian Thyroid Society, or my natural partner will be the pharma company who actually sells thyroid drugs, right? What is the threat from the buyer, right? What does that mean? That means, will the buyer pay money to buy this product, or will he or she expect it free, right? Or what is the price point they will look at paying, right? How do you capture that? That again comes from your needs, from your gains, pains, and jobs to do analysis, and also from understanding what are the needs of the potential customer, right? That exercise which you would have done, right? Then the next bucket is the product data bucket, right? This talks about what is the USP of my product, right? What is my product type? Is it a commodity product or is it a niche product, right? What are complementary products in the marketplace today, right? Complementary, right? Which doesn't necessarily do what your product does, but could be similar to what it does, right? Are there any substitute products in the market? What stage of the life cycle is the product in? So for example, if today I'm launching, the product life cycle, right? You have a early stage, then you have a growth stage, then you have a maturity stage, then you have a decline stage, right, of the product. So today, if let's say I'm going to go and launch a bottled water company, right, then I'm probably the market life cycle of the product is already in the mature state, because there's lots of players who are selling bottled water, right? And today, let's say I launch a product which is, let's say, I'm launch a company which is going to, let's say, provide training in COBOL, for example. That is a market which is already declining, right? So again, understanding what stage your product is in the product life cycle is, I think, very critical, right? And what are going to be my packaging and delivery models, right? For example, there's a company called HCAH, right, based in Noida. What they do is they say, we can sell your medical product in any zip code of the country. That's their claim to fame, right? And they say they can handle end to end in terms of even product returns, right? So packaging and delivery models. Then you look at your own organization, right? What is the reputation of your company in the market? Do you have a reputation? Do people know about you? If they don't know about you, why don't they know about you? Why aren't you talking about yourself in LinkedIn? Why aren't you talking about yourself, let's say, in Facebook? Why aren't you talking about yourself in Instagram or Twitter? Right? Those are all key things. Are there any special barriers to entry you've created? For example, let's say you got a overarching patent on a certain technology. Right? Is that going to now block competitors from coming in? Right? What are your competence and capabilities? Right? So do you have some really cool people on your team? Do you have some really sharp knowledge bases which you built, which nobody else has? What kind of capabilities do you have? Do you have people who can quickly build prototypes? Do you have people who do 3D machining and who are like the rock star of 3D machining? I don't know, right? So what kind of supply chain and distribution models do you have in mind for your organization? What kind of cost structures are you working with? What kind of investments are needed and do you have in place for your new product launch, let's say, right? What kind of ROI are you expecting, right? Are you expecting, let's say, to sell 100 devices in the next 1 year? Are you expecting to sell 1 million devices in the next 1 year, right? Based on that, your business model, your planning will have to change, right? What kind of branding do you have? Do you have branding? Do you have any key opinion leader, any good doctor on your team? Do you have a good marketing team? Do you have people who can create good messaging, positioning statements, things like that? What are the financial capabilities you have, right? Do you have money? What does your runway look like? Things like that. Then you will look at competition, right? What does the market landscape look like? Who are our competitors? What market shares do they have? What market type exists? Is it a growth market? Is it a declining market? Is it a nascent market? What is it? What does the CAGR look like, right? If at all there is one, right? When you look at competitors, again, do they have market share? What kind of products they have? What is their supply chain strategy looking like? How do they brand themselves? How do they sell to customers? How do customers reach out to them? Right? All that becomes very important, right? Are there any benchmarks established? This is why I say, right? For example, when you're trying to do your sensitivity specificity testing, right? you have to look and see, is there a gold standard? For example, for us, right, even though our product was a mobile phone based point of care diagnostic, our gold standard to test against was the Abbott Architect. This is a machine which costs 15 crores, by the way, right? And our product is 5,800 rupees, right? But yet the gold standard is an Abbott Architect. What the Abbott Architect measures in terms of TSH is what our gold standard specification should be, right? And that's what any big company will ask. You know, if you go and you try to sell your product to them, they'll say, oh, what are you benchmarking against? What does your sensitivity and specificity data say to us? And who have you compared it with, right? I think that becomes very key, right? Then look at competition in terms of barriers to entry. Have they created any barriers to entry, right? What does supplier power look like? Are there big suppliers in the marketplace, right? Will they be controlling you, or will you be able to control suppliers, right? What other threats exist? You know, are there any threats from the government? Are there any threats from the legal side? Are there any threats from the environmental side? What's going on, right? And then you map out business risks, you map out regulatory risks, and then you map out deal killer risks, right? Once you do these, I think you'll be in good shape from a perspective of your business model, right? Of course, there's a lot more stuff in here which I'm not going to cover, just because. See, by the way, this is like um, in in Qualcomm, this is like a 3-day course I run, right? And here it's a 1.5-hour course, right? Bootcamp. So I'm not going to cover too much detail. I think what I probably covered is kind of more than enough. Now, what we will do is we'll jump into our next section, which is talk about manufacturing, right? I'm always available in case you guys have any questions. You can always reach out, and we can go on from there. But from a business strategy perspective, this is what I would like to leave you away with, right? Be clear on what your key business objective is. This means knowing who your customer is, knowing why your customer will buy your product or service, knowing what your customer thinks he or she wants in terms of a product or service by doing the empathy mapping, by doing the value proposition canvas, by doing the pains gains job to do exercise. Right? Having that clear is important. Then comes market data, looking at the market, understanding what the market segment looks like, understanding the customer segments, understanding what customers look for, what kind of value, right? That will be important. Then you look at organic or inorganic. What does organic means? Can I do it myself? Can I build all this myself? Or, for example, let's say I'm a company, I don't have good digital marketing capabilities. Do I get somebody from outside who can help me do that? That's an inorganic driver, right? Enablers, these are like the key opinion leaders. Can I get doctors? Can I get people who are connected, entrenched in the industry helping me out, right? Then I need to have a financial model in place, right? How much it's going to cost me if I'm going to do a go-to-market plan? How much is going to cost me? How much is it going to cost me to acquire a customer? How much is it going to cost me to acquire a supplier? How much is it going to cost me to do my marketing? How much it's going to cost me to actually ship my product? All that becomes very important, right? Then having an implementation roadmap. I think these are the key pieces which I want to leave you guys with, right? Now, if you do the exercise which I have, right, in the Excel spreadsheet, you will probably get most of it, right, in terms of a perspective. And this is the Excel spreadsheet I was talking about. And apparently this is part of the book which they've given you, right? So this should cover that, right? So did you guys have any questions on the business model? Shoot. Pardon me?
So could you please reshare the screen? I mean, I see it's
again it's gone back, huh? Okay, sorry. Yeah, this is what is part of the business strategy blueprint, right? You need to cover the money, the moolah. You need to have a plan in place. You need to know who's going to help you sell the product, which is the enablers. You need to know who's your key business objectives, which is who's going to be your customer, which customer segment you're going to sell it to, why will they buy your product, why will they not buy your product, How are they currently buying products? Who are the competition? Why are they buying from competition? Why are they not buying from you? What is the gap? All those other things come in the market data. Right? Then you do your organic and inorganic drivers. Okay. So it's a very interesting exercise, right? And as I was saying, I've learned through my time that market is the most important piece of my business model. If I don't have a market, I don't have a business. Why? Because I don't have customers, right? So however cool my technology will be, if I don't have a customer, there's zero value in what I'm doing. It's as simple as that. Okay. So keep that in mind. All right. So any questions on business strategy, guys? Now is the time to shoot.
I request if
Oh.
anybody has any questions, they can unmute and ask, sir.
Hello. Yeah, I would. This is Subramania Dixit over here. Can I talk?
Yeah, please go ahead, Subramanian.
See, I have one question. Just a while earlier, you said you cannot sell the product at the same cost for the company or whoever it is, $5 million or $100 million, because the way they look at it is different. But is it possible to have two different pricing for the same product?
Yes, you can.
No, in case they come to not give a wrong impression.
No. It will have to have some subtle product changes. That's all. Right.
Oh.
So as I was telling you, right? So the example I used was an energy power meter, right? So the power meter which I sell to the government, I sell for 2,400 rupees. It's just an energy meter which I give to them, right? Now the same meter when I'm selling to a Shobha Villa guy for 28,000 rupees, I take that power meter, put it in a nice plastic casing, right? White color, which I get in Amazon, which I get in Alibaba, right?
Okay.
I bought it for 600 rupees, put that in a nice case, right? And then I also gave them what is known as a customer display unit, which again I bought for 800 rupees, right? So my cost was 700 plus, my cost was another 1,500 rupees, but I was able to sell it for 6 times my product cost. Right.
And we name
So
the product in the same. There won't be any change in the model.
it won't be. It will it will just be called. So, for example, the one we were selling was called Power One Super. The other one was called Power One Expert. Right.
Oh.
So you can. It's all about messaging. So what you do is you keep your core as the same, right? But then you do. It's like this, sir. You buy a Maruti 800 car, right? Then starts the conversation, right? Do you want AC? Okay, that's extra, right? Do you want two side mirrors? That's extra, right?
So making some small top-ups.
Yeah, exactly. But then it's also the value proposition, right?
Okay.
Because when you're selling to a Fortune 100 guy, you have to keep this was a good learning for us, by the way, right? We found out that a chap who owns a 4.5 crore villa in Shobha, right? He believes that he should only get expensive things, right? He doesn't believe that he should be provided cheap product, right? So because he is already now this big guy, 4.5 crore villa guy, right? So you can't go give him a simple energy meter. If you package it, you can sell it for 5 or 6 times the price is what we want. We were shocked because when we went and gave him, and it was the same product, same thing. If you open the plastic case, you would have seen it's the old product, same old product. But the plastic case made it look all shiny and nice. So suddenly 28,000 rupees, no problem.
It looks like
fits
what's
in.
preserving.
Yeah, it fits their value proposition. Simply, sir.
Got it.
Right?
Thank you.
It fits their goals and needs. It fits their how do I call it? Their perception about what a good product should be.
Yeah, model name should be different. and there should be some new value proposition into that.
Yes, yes, yes. And that's why I say, depending on your customer segment, your pricing model will change. Depending on your customer segment, your messaging, marketing will change. Your marketing messaging will change, right? And pretty much, so that's the key part, right? If you give a middle class message to a high net worth individual, he or she will not listen,
Okay.
right? Very
Yes,
key.
thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, yep.
Hi, sir. This is Surojit from Snehix Tech Private Limited.
Sure. Hi,
Sir,
Sorajit.
I have a question that what should be an ideal profit margin for selling, say, let's take an example of a device for a company to grow sustainably. I'll give an example. For example, my cost of production of a device is 25,000. How much I should sell it for? What should be the margin with which I'll be able to uh, I'll be able to grow the company from a small stage to the bigger one.
Yeah, that's a good one, right? If I knew that answer, we'll all be billionaires. No, but it boils down to this, right? It boils down to what is the customer segment you're trying to sell it to, right? So I'll give you this, right? So the typical margins, right, around medical devices go anywhere from 23% to 44%. Okay,
Okay.
typical margin, but that doesn't mean, so for example, I will tell you this, right? So a typical, let's say, um, delivery procedure, right? Baby delivery procedure, right? In
Yes,
a
sir.
small hospital costs about 25,000 rupees, right? Now, if you go and try doing the same procedure in Cradle 9, it costs 2.5 lakhs, right?
Right.
It's nothing is different, right? It's the same procedure they're going to be doing, except that there they will have fancy rooms, right? They will have fancy nurses. They'll tie balloons and give you, and they'll probably give you, I don't know, Tropicana juice instead of squeezed orange juice here, right? Whatever, right? So it eventually depends on what is the target segment you're looking at, right? If you're, and this is again, that's why I go back to saying you need to know what the value proposition is, right? This exercise would have come out if you had spoken to, let's say, 10 people and talk to them about what you're trying to build and say, look, if I'm building something like this, what would be a good pricing model for you, right? What would be the features you would want, key features you would want, right? What would be features you'd be willing to pay a premium on, right? If you had asked those kinds of questions, then you'll clearly know which segment is going to pay what kind of money for what kind of features I provide in terms of a product.
Okay. Sir, in our case, it's a consumer device, and it's considered like a cell phone, where we'll not able to make variable prices to the customer. The pricing will be the same, and because of the product with certain features. That, however, even if we go and ask somebody that what price range you want, possibly we'll not able to bring down it at that price range. So we have a cost of production, fixed cost of production, and after that we have to make some profit, good amount of money, so that we can keep our company growing. We should not keep on meeting our requirements only with that profit money. So that
Yeah.
exactly
So
is
this, yeah, this is a classic problem of not having done the market analysis before you went and built your product, right? And which I did too, by the way. I made the same mistake too. As engineers, we tend to make mistakes. Now you've got a product which is going to cost you X amount of money, right? Now you can't go and sell it in the market below X amount of money, which means then what you should do is you then figure out which kind of customers, which kind of customer segment will be able to afford that X kind of money, and can I do something more, right? So for example, I don't know enough about your product, right? Is there an opportunity where I can do, let's say, a dashboard for them and they can go access it on the cloud, and for that I charge maybe a subscription fee of 300 rupees a month or 500 rupees a month or whatever, right? Extra, right? Or maybe, along with this product, I say I'll give you I don't know, I'll give you this kind of service free for the first 3 months, but then I start charging you, but you need to pay in advance for the year. I don't know, right? Different kinds of models you can think about, right? In terms
Right,
of
sir.
this.
So
But
what you pointed out, exactly those 2 points are there in our case. That is a particular market segment, and the second example that you give, like charging for the cloud base. Both these things we have. But I was trying to understand, as you given numbers for a medical device, 23 to 43%. So we are building some edtech device and targeting the schools exactly. Schools means the uh, the kids, actually the parents whose kids are coming to the school, and that is what we are trying to understand, that what should be a good profit margin for a sustainable growth of the company.
yeah, a good profit margin would be 100%, honestly, right? If you had an opportunity to bill it like that, nothing like it, right? But again, edtech is a very interesting space. It's a tough space. I've played in it before, right? There are too many decision makers in that equation. And I don't know which model you're using. If you're using a B2B2C, which is you're selling to a school and the school sells to the student, then it's a different model. But if you're doing a B2C, which is you're going to the school and the school says you sell it directly to the student, that's a tough model to crack, right? Then you may want to look at PTA associations. You may want to look at what kinds of other networks they have, things like that, to actually do the sale. But it's a very tough model.
Yeah, okay, sir. Thank you. Ours is just for information. Ours is B2B2C.
Okay. So the school actually buys it and then they sell to the student.
Yes. So school either buys it or school agrees to sell it to the through them to the student. Yes. So,
okay. Then if you give enough value proposition to the school, right? Then the school should be able to push it.
Right. That is what we also thought. We also felt the same. But then, because when we pitched to some investor and we showed that we want to make $100 profit per device, per unit, some of them said that it is less. You will not able to sustain it. So that is what I was trying to find an answer from.
Yeah, very true, Suraj. Because so I ran a company called One Call. Okay, so we ran it where the idea was a customer makes one call, right? And we will go pick up whatever, right? The device. This was for phones, mobile phones or washing machines or any of the FMCG kind of products. So you make one call, and we handle the end to end of it, right? And we grew that to about 50,000 customers in about 8 months. But then I had to shut down the company because I was not making enough margin, right? For this kind of a business model, I needed to have lakhs and lakhs of customers. Then only I make good money, right? So then my recommendation to you is try to see if not only you look at using it in schools, but try to see if you can push it into complementers of schools, right? Maybe, I don't know, tuition centers. Maybe I don't know enough of your product, right? But maybe tuition centers, maybe groups of institutions, maybe figuring out if the Teachers Association of India, I don't know, or things like that, and trying to co-brand it with them and pushing it to the teachers, where you say a teacher gets a cut for every device. So I don't know. You can do many different things.
Thank you, sir. I got it. Interesting thing is that in 2 minutes you understand it exactly, and you have given me the same suggestion what other people have also given.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
No problem.
Sir, we have one question from Shrikar. He's from Nesa Medtech. So he asks, when you look at global access, how do you decide on specific geographies and prioritize it?
Yeah. So specific geography is based on the money. No, honestly, right? When you're an entrepreneur, I think the key thing you have to keep in mind is follow the money trail. Absolutely, right? Because if you don't follow the money trail, there's no food on the table. It's as simple as that, right? So what I would do is I would look for a few things. I would look for trends, right? Trends. I would look for large customer segments, because you have to understand, right? In certain business models, Investors will not put money unless they see a $200 million kind of business opportunity, or unless they see a $500 million business opportunity. They just will not put money in, right? So you'll have to have a large enough business opportunity, right? You'll have to have a good trend. Preferably, you'll also have to have an ecosystem which is primed and ready for this, right? And you would also have a situation where how do I call it, where your cost of your CAC, right, your customer acquisition cost is manageable, which by the way it is, right, for any segment. For developed economies, right, US is a great opportunity, Australia is a great opportunity as well. Developed economies, your customer acquisition cost is very, very marginal compared to the lifetime value which the customer gives you. So if I were you, I would look at the US market as an opportunity. And within the US market, I would then break it down into, let's say, areas where there are a larger women population in terms of healthcare needs, right? Or things like that, right? And then work my way from there.
Okay, sir. Do we have any more questions? Okay, sir, then we can continue with that.
Okay, cool. All right, good. So next we move on to, so this is another hat I wear. So, but because I've done manufacturing, right, of devices also, and other things, I'll just move on to the manufacturing bit. And Srikar, we can talk about your situation later as well, okay? Because that requires a lot more thought, and it requires very critical mapping in terms of your pains, gains, and jobs to do, right? Your value proposition has to be very clearly defined. Then your product will probably be looked at more closely. Okay, so now we'll move on to manufacturing, which is just give me a second. I'll go and open up that piece of it. Yeah. How do we know? Are you guys able to see my screen, or you're seeing something else?
No, sir, we are not able to see.
I'm also not able to see. That's why I asked you guys. Hold on. Okay, so this is where the sharing is. Okay, so I go to share screen. Okay, so I share the screen. I do this. You're able to see the prototype to production screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
You're okay. Cool. All right. So here, it's a little different thing, right? So manufacturing is something today, right? There are many different ways in which you can manufacture, and I will tell you my perspective, right? So initially, when we started manufacturing, we started making in Bangalore, right? The light boxes, right? Used to cost about $2.8, $2.9 a piece, right? And our business model is built around a low cost, high reach kind of a model, right? Because our whole philosophy of this point of care device was that the poor people, and let's say this is a classic case in India healthcare, right? You move, let's say 100 kilometers away from a city, right? And immediately the healthcare system kind of dips, right? Not dips, just breaks, right? So our thought was, is there a possibility where we could look at using mobile phones, right, as a point of care device, right? So that you can expand the healthcare footprint. That was the thought process, right? So as part of that thought process, then cost becomes a very critical piece of that equation, right? If cost becomes a very critical piece of the equation, then manufacturing becomes a very, very critical piece of the equation, right? Because manufacturing can make or break your product cost, right? So a few things we decided to do, right? The first thing we did was we didn't spend money making an injection mold, right? What we did was we actually went through the process from CAD CAM drawings to P0, where we actually built a simple 3D model, right? 3D modeled product. And then what we did was we took the 3D model, we went and showed it to a few customers, they liked it. Then we ended up making 20 3D models, right, to give it to larger numbers of prospective customers, right? Only after we got that did we decide that we should look at an injection mold, right? And what we did was, I and my colleague, Dr. Joel, we both went to Shanghai, right? And we sat there for about 10 days, right? And we actually had vendors shortlisted, and we ended up within those 10 days selecting a vendor, finalizing it, and coming back, right? So that was a different approach we took to manufacturing, because we felt that the cost of going to China, sitting in China for 10 days, was lower than the cost of producing an injection mold in India, right? Even so, not just the cost of the mold, but also the time and the quality and things like that, right? Because unlike what many of you may think, China provides you a wide array of quality products, right? So if you can actually say, I want top quality, and you will get a top quality product for a certain price. If you say, this is my price, they will give you a quality based on that price, right? So you have a range, right? So that is something we leveraged very well. In fact, the only thing what matters is when you have conversations with them, if they ask for certain volumes, right, for certain levels of quality, and I think that's something to keep in mind, right? Now today, if you guys aren't looking at that, Taipei is a good place to look at, right, in terms of an alternate source for manufacturing, right? Another place is Korea. South Korea is a good place also to look at, right? They're fairly comparable. And of course, in India, Gujarat, NCR are good places, right? Um, of course, Bangalore and other places are still developing, but I don't see costs dropping anytime soon, right?
This is Kiran here.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Interesting that you said that you went to Shanghai and then shortlisted these vendors. So question is, how did you do your homework for this? As in, I assume it's not like you just flew to Shanghai, sat there and say, all right, let me see.
No. So what would happen typically is you would actually reach out through your network, right? Today they're all connected on LinkedIn, by the way, right? You reach out to your network. You actually have people, right? For example, we reached out to the Bat Club, right? There's a Baiju Alibaba Tencent Club, right? Which was connected by our investors, right? They said, why don't you talk to them? So there was a person there who actually helped us in terms of identification. That you have to do anyway. The China visa you won't get unless you have a local contact, right?
Right.
So typically you can reach out to the industry bureau, or you reach out through LinkedIn and you get some connects. People who are known to you, right? Who are known to you, who then connect you to somebody who's known to them in China.
Right.
That's a model you go through, right?
All right.
And it works out wonderfully well, by the way, and it's mind-boggling where they are in terms of their ability to manufacture. I think at least about 30 years ahead, right, minimum, right? So that's what we did, right? And what we essentially did was we looked at a model where we said one of two things we could do, right? We could get knockdown kits, right? As in make 3 or 4 different components, import it into India, assemble it, and then sell it, which is how most of the made in India products get sold anyway, right? Or we have an option where we could get a semi-finished good, right, SFG, and then so make it into 2 components, bring them to India, and then assemble it, right? So we looked at this and looked at customs and other things, and decided that we would go for a semi-finished model kind of an approach, primarily because keeping our customer base in mind, right? Our user base are probably going to be Anganwadi workers, right? Workers who probably are not really sharp in terms of putting something together, right? So our product had to be simple, click and fit kind of assembly model, right? So for that, we felt that the technology was best in Shanghai. That's how we got that done, right? Now, that is something I've done for the medical device. Now, earlier, when I was doing my smart energy company, right, there the components were slightly different, right? So there I used a distributed manufacturing model. What I did was, since it was an electric meter, right? So it has plastic, it has brass terminals, it has certain electric components, right? A circuit board and things like that. So what I did was I kind of broke it down into a best of breed kind of a model, right? Where I told L&T, who were in Mysore, right? I said, you guys make me the plastics, right? And I spoke to some people in Jamnagar, Gujarat, where the brass is good, right? I said, you make me the brass terminals, right? And I spoke to a vendor in Bangalore called Emans, who actually used to make printed circuit boards. So I spoke to them. I said, you do my PCB assembly for me, right? And what I did was I said I will run a box and scale kind of model, right? Which means I get I get the plastic from Mysore, I get the brass terminals from Gujarat, I get the circuit boards from Bangalore, and I have a small facility where I take all this, put this together, assemble it, and I sell it, right? So you can do it's called a box assembly kind of manufacturing approach, right? So why I'm sharing that with you is because manufacturing need not necessarily be done at one place, right? You can actually now break it down into many different types of models, right? You can even get to a situation where you can say, I will lease a certain line for a certain time of day, which is also something we did. So for example, when you actually make a electric meter, right, there's something called a mortality test you need to run, which means that you need to test if this thing, because these things are regulated, right, in India, which means that these things are supposed to run for, I don't know, forever without any problems, kind of, right? So there is a mortality test which is mandated by the government. And so for that, we needed to buy very expensive test machines, right? They're called tester labs, right? We didn't want to buy them. So what we did was we went and spoke to L&T here in Bangalore, who were looking at closing down their energy metering business. And we said, can we rent your test labs for some time, right? And we entered into a partnership with them where we paid money for them to rent their product, and it ended up being a win-win, right? So what happened for me is I saved about 2.5 crores each, right? In terms of my capex cost, right? Okay, somebody wants to have lunch, I guess. No. Okay.
I'm sorry,
So
guys.
no problem. So you have different approaches to this, right? You need not necessarily, manufacturing does not necessarily mean you have to buy all the equipment, put it together in one place. Not necessary anymore. You can do a build and scale kind of model. You can do a box assembly model. You can do a subscription kind of model. You can do an outsourced manufacturing model. Today there are people who will be willing to. So especially in the medical device space, right? There are quite a few people who will say, I will handle your entire manufacturing for you, right? For a certain cost. Right? So again, those are some things from an entrepreneur perspective you have to keep in mind. Why? Because manufacturing is capex intensive, right? And you really don't want to tie all your capital, if at all possible, into manufacturing. Now, that said, right, regulations come in, but even regulations you can handle, right? No problem. Because if you actually are a specification developer, you can call yourself as a specification developer, and then you can enter into a intellectual property agreement with your outsourced manufacturer, right? And that is perfectly acceptable by the FDA also, right? So we've done that too, right? So it need not be that, because of regulatory compliance, I need to have my own manufacturing facility, not necessary, right? So that's something just to keep in mind from a manufacturing perspective, right? Explore many different things, right? So from a startup's life cycle, I think you've gone through, hopefully you guys have done the market validation. Hopefully you've gone through your product development. You're almost at the cusp of commercialization, right? That's where I hope you guys are, right? So today, when you look at products, right, there's a lot of different issues, right? There are issues around bias, right? Today, I know for a fact that in India, if you sell products which says made in India, you may have more acceptability challenges than if you sell a product which, for example, let's say is assembled in Korea, right? And said it's made in Korea, that may be accepted more than a product which says made in India. That's the truth of the matter, right? And another truth of the matter is, if let's say you set up a LLC in the US, which you can set up for, I don't know, $1,000 now, and you say this product was designed in the USA and manufactured in India, that may have better acceptability also, right? So different things like that come into play, right? When you're thinking about manufacturing, right? And it's up to the entrepreneur to really think about it, think hard about it, and figure out what should I be doing in terms of my strategy, right? Now, what we have done is, so for example, when COVID started, right, we had a partner in Sweden who actually had an antibody test. It was an IgG and IgM kind of test you could potentially do, right? So we wanted to look at selling it in China, right? So one of the things we found was, from Sweden to China, it's a long haul. So we figured it may be cheaper for us to open an office in Korea, right, South Korea, and then from South Korea you kind of ship the product to China. That may actually make sense, right? And that's something we did through an intellectual property transfer license from Sweden to Korea, right? So you can do many different things in terms of model, right? So be very open to that is what I'm saying, right? And look at what kinds of opportunities present themselves, what makes best sense, what doesn't make sense, things like that. All right. Now I know Telangana offers a lot of schemes for startups. All right. They also offer a lot of schemes for apparently manufacturing medical device startups too, is what I've heard. Now that's something you have to ratify and see, does it make sense, does it not make sense, things like that. Okay. So this is the product learning loop. I'm sure you guys would have gone through this. I'm not going to spend much time on that. Right. This is around design thinking, right? And hopefully all of you have used design thinking. Yes.
Yes, Anand. Yep.
Okay, brilliant. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to talk through the Excel sheet. Okay. So when you look at design for manufacturability, right, there are a few things you will want to do, right? So for example, what may work in terms of a prototype at P0, right, may not scale when you want to make many copies of the same prototype. Why? Because there are many different issues around it. One could be, for example, we found out, right, using a simple low quality resistor, right, worked well during the prototype, but when you actually started doing mass manufacturing, caused a lot of product failure, right? Resistors, capacitors, right, thyristors, many different things can actually cause problems, right? So design for manufacturing is a process where, again, it's like doing it right perspective, right? You look at each and every part of your prototype, and then you test and check if it's ready for scalability, right? So which means then you do an exercise which involves how do I call it, which involves a deep dive into every aspect of your product, right? So for example, if let's say you're looking at your product having a plastic casing, right? Then during the prototype, it may look well, but then you have to look at your intended use. And let's say if this product is going to be sitting outside in let's say in environmental conditions which are not favorable, will this plastic degrade or not, right? That is part of your design for manufacturing, right? Then again, during the prototype building, you may have taken many different components. You may have, I don't know, you may have created a multi-layered PCB board, and you may have built it, right? Now, during your mass manufacturing, do you really want a multi-layered PCB board, or do you want it to be a single one board? Why? Because you reduce your points of failure, right? The more components you have in your product, the more challenges you'll have, right? So design for manufacturing is a way whereby you kind of simplify the process of manufacturing, right? By making things as standard as possible, right? Or as simple as possible in a very quixotic sense, right? That's what it is, right? So there are some design guidelines I've come up with, right? So the first step you'll do is you look at your prototype, right? Are you guys seeing the Excel screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so it's being shown. Okay, cool. So the first step you will do is you look at it and you'll say, I need to look at how many parts are there in my prototype, right? Can I minimize the number of parts which are there in my prototype, right? Why would you want to do this? Again, you want to minimize your points of failure, right? Why does that come into play? So for example, if let's say you have 20 parts in your prototype, right? Then when you're looking at scaling, you need to manufacture 20 parts. You need to do QC on 20 parts. You need to do QA on 20 parts, and then you need to have assembly, a larger assembly line, which will be able to take those 20 parts and put that together, right? So is there an opportunity where I can minimize the number of parts, right? And some of the questions which you need to answer there are, right? Have you done a parts analysis and analyzed for fewer parts and assembly drawings, right? So one of the things which we did, as I told you, right? One of the first things which we did was when we actually got this product to India and we saw this light issue was there, we figured that maybe we can take one of those phone sleeves, right? Which is available, the plastic phone sleeve, and maybe we can stick a set of LED bulbs around it, right? So that, it would give enough light for the test to be done, right? That was the first thought we had. Then we found out that if we stick LED bulbs around that plastic sleeve of the phone, right, will the LED bulbs fall off, right? If we go and give it, let's say, in some rural healthcare center, right, will they keep it safe? Will they throw it around, right? Will it get damaged, right? Is there a possibility that can I minimize it by making it part of something else, right? Can I make something which fits in snugly, right? And that's how we came up with so we went from sticking LED lights around a phone sleeve to then sticking LED lights around a magnifying lens to creating a light box, right? Because we felt that for India, a light box would probably be a best use case because it would be made of iron, right? And inside it, it would have an LED bulb. So when you put the phone on it, it will sit snugly on it. And that way we will end up, it's a localization factor, right? And we've looked at intended use and we felt, okay, so we now make it two parts, right? Instead of a sleeve, a set of LED lights, a battery for the LED lights, and then a phone, which was 4 parts. Now we make it 2. There's a phone, and then there's a light box. That's all, right? So you will do a similar analysis, right? Have you done a parts analysis and analyzed for fewer parts in assembly drawings, right? Have you explored the assembly to see if assembly can be done in a less complex way, right? This is exactly going back to the situation, right? So why? Because as a startup, right? Again, it's all costs, right? For example, if you have 20 parts and you need a, let's say, a diploma engineer to put it together, or you need an electrical engineer to put it together, right? Can you make it simpler by having the manufacturer or the contract manufacturer or the supplier make parts which can be easily interlocked, right? So that instead of employing a diploma or an engineer, can I employ a 12th standard pass or a PUC guy who then just takes and put these together, right? And that's something we did, by the way. We did that in the power energy company, right? So initially with the Gujarat company, we had them just make brass terminals, right? And they would sell these terminals, and here we would fix it. Then what we did was we had them say, no, no, you put the screw and you make it and you send, so that it just clicks into my plastic, right? So why did I do that? Because I was looking at optimizing my cost. I was also looking at labor, right? Can I get cheaper labor? Can I get more abundant labor? Do I lock myself into a situation where I now need an engineer, and if the engineer quits, then my assembly line stops? I don't want that to happen, right? I want to make it as simple as possible for myself in terms of my product manufacturing, right? So that's something to look at. Then this is something we discussed, right? Explored fewer parts to hold to required QC, right? So if I have fewer parts, then I have to do less quality control, right? That means then I don't need very expensive QC technicians or QC engineers. I can do with lesser people, and then I can do it with lesser equipment also, right? And the other part is I have fewer parts to fail, right? So points of failure is something you guys have to keep in mind, especially in manufacturing, which means if you have 20 parts, right, you potentially have 20 parts of failure, points of failure, right? Because each part could be a failure at some point, right? Could be made wrong, right? If you make it 4, then you have 4 points of failure, right? So design for manufacturing is a process whereby you minimize your points of failure also, right? So that is the first step I will do, right? I will look at minimizing the number of parts, right? Then the next thing is, step 2 is minimize the number of part numbers, right? So what this means is, for example, if I have to, let's say, make parts which look very similar, right? Let's say joints, right? Can I make an interlinked joint, for example, right? So that it makes it easier for me in terms of my bill of material. It makes it easier for me in terms of selecting one supplier who can make the same 2 things for me, right? It makes it easier on me in terms of my credit, in terms of my distribution, in terms of my supplier strategy, in terms of my supply chain, right? So fewer variations of like parts. That's what it is, right? So if, let's say, I'm making a joint, right? Is there a possibility of making how do I call it, joints which can fix to itself instead of 2 complex parts, right? That is what I mean by minimize number of part numbers, right? The third thing I would do is I would look at making assembly process easy and error proof, right? What that means is, right, I can only put things in a certain way, right? I will not be able to take 2 parts and put it together in whatever way possible, right? It's like, how do I call it? Yeah, it's like putting your phone sleeve, right? You have your phone protection sleeve, right? You can only put it in one way. You can't put it in another way because then your camera will not be shown, right? That is an example of making your assembly process easy and error proofing it, right? So ensure your parts cannot be assembled wrong. That's a very critical piece. right? Make it blatantly obvious when parts are missing, right? So, for example, if you are able to only put the part in one way, right, together, then if the part is missing, then it will clearly be known, right? Ensure assembly tooling is designed into part, right? This means that what I was saying, right? Your lock and click kind of approach, or press it and it locks kind of approach, right? So you don't need separate screwdriver or something to be done, or you don't need separate spanner to be used, or any assembly process to be used. You just press it and it clicks together, right? That kind of an approach, right? Ensure parts are self-securing. This is exactly what it is, right? So it's all part of the process of making your assembly process easy and error-proofing it, right? So you press it and it clicks. There is no, how do we call it, play in the parts, things like that. For example, let's say instead of self-clicking, you had to screw it in, right? Some people may use a screw tightly. Some people may leave it little loose, right? Then you'll have play in the parts, right? And during shipping, your parts may get loose, a circuit may break, and that may lead to problems with your product, right? So minimizing those kinds of issues, right? No force fitting of parts. That's what I was mentioning, right? Force fitting of parts. This means that you don't get into a situation where you have to really tightly screw things, or tightly use your spanner and do things, stuff like that, which may lead to breakage of the screw threads, or may lead to breakage of the components or whatever. Not right now, but during shipping, during handling, whatever, right? Step 4 is use repeatable, well understood processes. This is also known as, there are many different models for you to look at, right? There's something called 5S, there's something called 7S, right? There's also something called lean manufacturing, which will help you build this kind of a thing, right? If you get into that situation at all, for example, the way we designed our facility, this was an electronic city phase 2, right? We built our facility purely as a lean manufacturing setup, which means what you do is you reduce what is known as muda, right? Which is waste, which means a particular component of your product comes to a certain part of the assembly line only once, right? Which means it's a cumulative process. So the part comes in, the assembly works on it, moves to the next stage of the assembly, there's something else gets added, moves to the next stage, something else gets added, moves to the next stage, something else gets added, then it goes into a semi-finished queue, something else gets added, then it goes into the finished goods queue, then it gets boxed, and then it gets stored in the storeroom, right? So you can use, so what we did was we used conveyor belts is a good way to do it. Standing stations is a good way to do it. Standing assembly stations is a good way to do it, right? Because and single component assembly stations is a good way to do it, which means that every assembly point only has one piece of work to do, right? Why you do that? Because that lends itself to error proofing your whole model, right? That lends itself to making sure you're not missing steps, right? So that's what this means, right? Use repeatable, well understood processes, right? Part quality is easy to control. That's what I said, right? Because your your component comes only once to your station, right? And that work gets done and moves on to the next station, right? Which means your part quality is easy to control. Your assembly quality is also easy to control because there is no complex things going on, right? So imagine a situation where if you had an assembly station and the assembly person had to do 4 or 5 things, right? Unless they are extremely well trained and they follow a very strict sequence, there's a chance for missing a few steps, right? So by doing this kind of a process, by use a lean manufacturing approach, you can minimize the issues around assembly quality and part quality. Okay. Then step 5, choose parts that service process operations, right? What this means is This means choose good. This is part of the design for manufacturability, right? So for example, you guys know you can buy resistors for 10 paise, right? You can buy resistors for 25 paise also, right? Try to look at it and try to give me a second. Try to look at it and try to study the optimum conditions for the resistors. Try to study the mean time of failure. Try to study their optimum operating conditions. Try to look at it from a holistic perspective of your product, right? Don't look at it as, oh, it's just a resistor, so I can use what I want. Right? Not really. You look at it from a perspective of, hey, this resistor is a key part of my product, and it should be of the highest quality possible that I intend to use. Then look at your IFU, right, which is your instructions for use, right? Where will this product be used? Will this be used in harsh weather conditions? Will this be used in, will this be handled in a very poor way, right? Then you need to start looking and seeing, how should the resistor be held? Should I look at different ways of soldering? All those come into play, right? So that's what this means, right? Choose parts that service process operations, right? So that you'll have less damage to parts, less degradation of parts. Believe it or not, right? A 10 paise resistor actually almost cost us our certification, right? So when we in India, there's something called the Bureau of Indian Standards. It's called BIS, right? So when we were manufacturing these electric meters, right, we had to comply with a standard called BS 17799, right? That's a standard for measuring instruments, right? And what that means is, that means that your product will be taken to CPRI, which is a Central Power Research Institute, and they'll put your product for intense testing, right? And what we found out was, when we went from a prototype to a product, right? The first, let's say 500 meters we made, we used the same resistor, right? And that resistor failed when it was put for intense testing. It passed during prototype testing, where you keep it and you test it for 1 hour, 2 hours, and things like that. But when you put it on continuous high volume or high electricity load for 72 hours, which is your mortality test, the resistor failed. And so, luckily for us, this came up during a process called development assistance. It's called DA testing. This is done by CPRI itself. And then we had to take it and we had to figure that out. So from there came the thought that choose parts that service process operations, right? Don't neglect it. Especially in medical devices, right? Because you are also bound by other negligence, warranties, and other things. So make sure that you choose the right kind of components you need, right? And of course, you have, make sure you get a good procurement engineer, right, who can make those kinds of decisions for you, right? Then step 6, design for efficient and adequate testing, right? What that means is that when you're making your products, right? When you're putting your products together, your sub-assembly, your jigs and things like that, make sure you test it in every stage of the process, right? If you have a sub-assembly, make sure that there's a QC process for the sub-assembly. Make sure you develop a test jig for testing that sub-assembly, right? So do that. It's very important to do that, right? Don't just keep the testing for once you have assembled everything and it's a semi-finished good, right? Because that way you minimize your points of failure. You also make sure your quality is really good, right? That's what this means, right? So it's tougher to mistake good product for bad product and vice versa, right? Because your product on the whole may look good, but if your sub-assembly has a point of failure, then there's a problem, right? So at every stage of the process, right? And this is what I've very stringently done, even though it may end up costing us slightly more, right? You can still, it's stringently done to make sure that our quality is tested on a component by component basis. Right? We've gone into that level of testing, because your product is only as good as how it works, right, in the marketplace. So you can't have that situation. And one of the key reasons why a made in India product is not acceptable as compared to, let's say, a made in Korea product is because of this, right? We don't necessarily think through the design for manufacturing. I think it's a very critical piece to do that, right? Step 7, right? Lay out parts for reliable process completion, right? What that means is the more number of parts which are not shaking, not jiggling in your finished product, the better you are, right? And that's what I meant. So it goes back to the earlier points about having self-clicking models, having no screw models, right? Having things which securely fit, right? Which don't have scope for any what is known as play in the manufacturing space, right? So you don't have something jiggling, you don't have something which is not tightly fit, right? So the more you put effort into these kinds of things, right, the more better will you be a product, especially when it's shipped. Because see, you also have to keep in mind, right? Your product is only as good as what it is when it lands on your customer's table, not when it leaves your product, when it leaves your factory, right? So I think that's something you have to keep in mind, right? So if you lay out parts for reliable process completion, you have less damage to parts during shipping and handling. That's the thought process. Right. Step 8, right? Eliminate engineering changes on release products. This is a very, very critical thing. Of course, in your regulations, right? Especially in your device history file, right? You will have that, right? You really can't make changes to products which have been released, right? You'll only have to do a product recall and then work on that, right? So there's something called change control, right? This is a very essential part of your product manufacturing strategy, which means that once you developed your prototype, right, and once you've done your design for manufacturing, right, which is again going through your components step by step, making sure you validate each and every component which goes into your product manufacturing. Then once you've done that and you said this is what my design for manufacturing product is going to look like, then you want to make any change, it has to go to a change process, right? Change control process, which means that you will have to define why you want to make the change, and what were the options you considered, and why you cannot do without making the change, right? And you'll have to do that, and you'll have to make sure it's tested and verified by quality control, by quality assurance also. Why? Because you now moved from a prototype stage to now you've done your DFM, which means your product is now ready for scalability. But then you're now going to replace even a small resistor or a capacitor. You still have to do that. I think it's very important to do that, right? Why? That helps you. It's called regression testing also, right? That helps you in terms of fewer errors due to changeover and multiple revisions, right? And this also used to be a key problem, right? So remember I told you about how I outsourced the manufacturing of the PCB to a vendor in Bangalore, right? We found the vendor, right, replaced a certain capacitor with a different manufactured capacitor. That cost us our product to fail. Our product failure rejection rate went up from 7 per 100 to something like 18 per 100. And we found out it was because of this small little capacitor he had bought from another supplier, which he didn't inform us, right? And these are the engineering changes which will catch you, right? So make sure it's a very tightly controlled ship you're on. Okay. Step 9 is packaging and labeling, right? So what when you're doing your manufacturing, right, packaging and labeling is a very critical piece of your plan, right? Why? Because I know for a fact that engineers look at it from remember jobs to do, look at it from a functional perspective. This works, acha kaam kar raha hai, that's enough for us, right? But then when you're selling it to customers, especially doctors, they look at it from two more perspectives, from an emotional perspective and from a social perspective. An emotional perspective says that this looks good, it looks very professionally done. And how does that get conveyed? By your packaging, right? How well you package, how securely you package. I can tell you a story of how when our product was getting launched in Thailand, right? One large pharma company spent crores on just designing the right packaging, right? Since we were in the thyroid space, right? They wanted to launch it during World Thyroid Day, right? And they ended up packaging it in pink because their particular product was pink in color, things like that. So large amounts of thinking go into packaging and labeling, right? Now, labeling falls under two things. One is labeling, which is part of your regulatory compliance, which is your IFU, right? Your instructions for use, and other information, right? General user manual and things like that information, right? So the packaging labeling has to contain, first things first, the bomb, right? What does it contain? It contains one lancet. It contains one lancet of I think gauge 5. It contains 10 strips. It contains one I don't know, one phone sleeve. It contains one mobile phone. It contains one light box. It contains one cover for the kit, whatever, right? So that is the information about the product content. Then the information for use. This will say this particular product, so the strips have a lifetime of 2 years, can be used within 2 years, right? This particular product has to be kept in temperatures between 5 degrees Celsius and 40 degrees Celsius, beyond which the product may not work well, things like that, right? Then comes your brand name, right? Choose a good brand name. For example, if if let's say you're doing something in the neuro space, then you'll call it maybe Cogni or Brain or Neuro or whatever, right? And yeah, so if let's say you're doing something in the TSS space, maybe you'll call it Thyro whatever, Thyro Kill or Thyro Kick or whatever, right? Things like that. And again, keep in mind, packaging and labeling also fall under guidelines. So the government has guidelines around how you can package, what should you say, what should you not say. Should there be an IUD, right? UID? Should there be any lot number? Should there be a batch number? Should there be all that is there? So you have to look at compliance to state and central standards, depending on whether your device is a class 1, class 2, class 3 kind of device, right? And of course, the CE certifications, the FCC, the ISI, the FDA, they all have different regulations. So those are all things you should make sure you go through before you decide on your packaging and labeling. I think they're very key pieces, right? That's why I said in medical devices and in healthcare, your legal and your regulatory take a very large precedent towards what you want to do, okay? Step 10 is the pricing models, right? Again, in pricing models, we have an MRP pricing, right? In certain situations, you may not want to put the pricing, right? For example, let's say you're giving demo kits or something, then you may want to put demo use only, whatever, right? And there are different configurations, right? For example, in our product, we may sell a product with 10 lancets, 100 strips, one mobile phone, one light box, and sell it, right? In another kit, we may have 500 strips, 50 lancets, right? Or whatever, right? So different combinations or configurations you can do in terms of your selling, right? Then comes bulk pricing, right? So again, how do you look at bulk pricing? And this is where I think you have to look at regulations, but you also have to look at other things around the legal aspect of how would you price it, what would be the distributor margin, what would be the retailer margin, things like that, right? The other thing you will also think about in terms of your manufacturing strategy is paying advance versus post purchase, right? So what I used to do, right? So we ran into a problem where we didn't have cash in terms of a working capital, right? So what I ended up doing was I ended up going and talking to our top suppliers and telling them, you know what, if you partner with me, right, I'll make you my preferred supplier, right? And I will ensure that you are the one who gets the contract, irrespective of what it is, right? And what I will also do is I will make sure that as we move forward, I'll give you a percentage of my profit to you, right? But then what you have to do for me to help me with my working capital is instead of me paying you in 45 days, please extend my credit terms to 60 days or to 90 days, right? So it's a negotiation you do, right? And those are some things you can do, and most people will be open to that, right? Because many of the vendors will look at suppliers will look at you for continuous stream of business, and if you're able to sign an agreement with them in bond paper or whatever, saying, I'll give this to you, I will commit this to you, then they are open towards giving you more flexible credit term operations. What that does do for you, it helps you in terms of rotating your working capital. Okay. Other things you can do: cost-based cost-based pricing, market-based pricing, value pricing. These are all some things to keep in mind, right? In terms of your, this is where it comes down to, right? Value pricing, right? So you'll put it in a nicer box, nicer brand packaging. Maybe you'll use a velvet cover when you probably give your package to, let's say, a Cradle 9 hospital, right? When you're selling it, let's say, to a Jayadeva, you'll probably put it into a cardboard box with maybe a plastic cover and sell it, right? That's value pricing, right? Then the other thing you'll have to look at is product liability, right? What does that mean? That means that you are saying, that live any damages or injuries suffered by a buyer, user, or bystander as a result of a defective product, right? So you have to make sure this again gets into legalese. So you'll have to make sure you talk to your legal firm, whoever, and make sure you cover yourself from a product liability perspective, right? There are many different aspects to this, right? There's something called negligence, right? Even in negligence, there's something called willful negligence, which means that you say that this product should not be used in bodies of water, but yet the customer goes and uses it in bodies of water and has an injury. Then that's willful negligence, right? Then figuring all that out, covering all that is, I think, very important, right? Warranty, again, how do you handle a warranty? How do you handle your misrepresentation and this is something many people got caught very recently also in the FDA, right? So somebody developed a software product, right, which apparently is used for, let's say, improving your ability to improving for autistic children, right? And they labeled it and they said this is a product which will help your children improve memory, whatever, right? And the FDA caught them at it and said, no, that's not true. You cannot say that because it's misrepresentation. You can say this product may help you with helping improve cognitive skills of the child. You cannot say that this will help with improving memory. Similar to many of our desi products which get sold, right? Which says this will help relieve your arthritis, this will help relieve your back problem, this, that, and all that. So again, you have to be very careful in terms of how do you state what your product will deliver in terms of value. Because these regulatory agencies, especially abroad, India, I don't know, right? Regulatory agencies, especially abroad, keep watching for misrepresentation and they can sue your butt off, honestly, right? And all they have to do is they can issue an FDA 483 and you will be shut down, right? So make sure you spend a lot of time thinking through your product strategy in terms of product liability, warranty, misrepresentation. Many of us don't think about it, right? Many of us figure, okay, product bana diya, abhi bejne ka hai bas, right? But that's where in India you can get away. Abroad you will not be able to get away. Okay. Then step 12 is red notebooks and data, right? What is a red notebook? Red notebook is the book you probably, well, it came from old adage where labs used to have these red color notebooks where they would, how do I call it? They would track each and everything they did right from day one of building their product, right? So this is very important for you. Why? Because at any time during your regulatory approval, right, the FDA or this or the EU or anybody can ask you, show me, how you went about starting to build your product. I want to see that, right? And that is part of what is known as a device history file. It's also called DHF, right? These are all very critical components you have to keep. So if you're a medical device manufacturer, and if you don't have that, I highly recommend you go back and you build that. One of two things, right? It also helps you protect yourself. For example, let's say somebody files a patent, right, which infringes on your device, right, on your patent. Then the judicial arbitration will ask, show me a red notebook, show me your device history file where you've said that you've done this, and you filed for a patent, right? So I think it's a very important empirical evidence of the fact that you design the product yourself, right? So maintaining a device history file is very key. Maintaining device record files is also very key. Uh, and looking at UID and product recall models, right? I know that there are some regulatory agencies which say you need to have a unique identifier for every aspect of your device. And there are different regulations which say that you need to track at the batch number or at the lot number or at the time and date with batch number. Many different things are there, right? So you may have to look at it and see what gets covered, what does not get covered, right? Then this is post-market, right? Adverse events protocol. This means that once my product is out, right, I need to also be able to track and see what kind of problems my product is creating, right? This means the product is misbehaving, right? It's not complying to the verification and the validation phase of what we did. So that also has to be maintained, right? In fact, the FDA mandates that you have an adverse reactions events database, which they can audit at any time. They mandate that, right? So you have to make sure that you look at having something like that in place, right? And the last thing I would like to say is, do it right the first time, right? Um, Believe me, I've struggled through this, right? I've gone ahead and built stuff and then realized that I need to do documentation. By the time you built your product, you've forgotten where you started from, right? So as you keep building your product, keep maintaining your device history file, keep maintaining all the notes, all the records, so that at any point in time when the regulatory agencies or anybody is going to ask, you can show it to them. Okay, and in this space, I think doing it right the first time is the only way to go when you're building medical devices. Okay. So this is something I've kind of summarized, right? As a DFM, it's a very complex topic, by the way. There's lots of stuff to do, lots of techniques to use, right? And there are some techniques which I've given, right? So one of the things I recommend you using if you have not started building your device is to look at what is known as a house of quality, HOQ it's called, right? Look at building a house of quality, right? That's a way whereby you will actually map out what customers want in terms of requirements, and you'll also map out it in terms of a quality control perspective, and you'll be able to build good, high quality products, right? And this falls under the gamut called total QQM, total quality manufacturing, right? So under that, there are many different models you can use. I think the workbook has a few models given, right? If you look at it, right, for example, there's something called the MET matrix. It is used for environment, right? Again, if you're doing something which is not related to the environment, then you don't need to use it, right? You can look at using the LOR, right? The list of requirements. This is like a framework you can use for listing, for example, geometry, right? My product should be small. What does small mean? Does small mean it has to be like 10 centimeters? Does small mean it has to be 15 centimeters, right? And what is the weightage of the wish, right, from the consumer side? Are they saying it? They demand that it has to be small, or they wish that it has to be small, right? And using these kinds of models, right, you can actually kind of come up with a product strategy, right? What should you be doing, designing in terms of your product? What is the best call to make in terms of your product, right? You can come up with this. And I know you guys attended the session by Vijay Sama, right?
Yes, Anand.
Yeah. So he would have covered that house of quality, right? At least he told me he will do that. I don't know if we did that, but that's something for you guys to refer, right? And this sheet will give you some ideas. For example, morphology chart, right? Let's say you need to have a power supply for your device, right? You look at all the different options available in terms of power supply, right? You look at rechargeable batteries, you look at AC/DC motor, you look at ordinary batteries, then you'll make a judgment call. Which one should I use for my product, right? Maybe if cost is a factor, right, then I will not use a AC/DC motor. I will not use a rechargeable battery. Maybe I'll go with the batteries which are available off the shelf, right? Example, display, right? So if I want to use, let's say, an LCD display, or I want to use an LED display, or I want to use a plasma display, right? Depending on how I want to think about my product cost, I will choose what I want to use, right? So morphology chart is another framework you can use, where you can list out your BOM, your bill of materials, right? What are the different components needed for your device, and then figure out what are the various alternatives available for it, and then kind of choose which one makes sense for me at this point in time, right? So like that, you have many different things, options available. So there's a morphology chart, there's a list of requirements. Again, if you end up doing the market validation, which I spoke to you about in the previous session, then you don't need to worry about all this, because all these things get covered in your customer needs, wants, customer gains, pains, jobs to do kind of a thing. All this will get covered there, right? But these are very specific manufacturing tools and frameworks which are available, which if you want, you can look at using. Okay. So that's all I had, guys. Any questions you guys had, please shoot. There's a large deck, by the way, right, which I will share. You guys can go through it. It covers design thinking. It covers many different aspects. See, for 1.5 hours, I just wanted to cover the key points. So whatever you saw in that in that Excel sheet is what this deck has, right, of about 220 slides, whatever, right? So I've just kind of simplified that for you, right? And by the way, this book of mine, which I said, the top 60 decision-making frameworks for startups, that's a free download. There are also some manufacturing frameworks there, which I have, which you can use, okay? So that should also be helpful for you, okay? So I will close this. I will be open for any questions. Please go ahead. Manufacturing is a very tough subject to to talk through. You actually have to do it, right? And then you'll get there. So if you don't have any questions, then what I will do is, yeah, the deck will be there. It'll be shared. And if you guys have any questions, you can always reach out to me. My email is there on the, okay, I'll just type it here. So So if you guys have anything, you can reach out to me and I'll try to see how much I can help you guys. Okay. So all the very best. Hopefully this was hopeful. Well, I hope this was useful. And once again, I apologize for not being able to do it face to face. Just my mother felt very sick, and I was with her in hospital for about a month or so. So I just couldn't come out of that.
So I hope there are no more questions. So on behalf of Jinsurf, Kiran.
Yeah, it is Surajit again from Snahix.
Yeah, please.
Anand sir, one very generic question. In the very beginning, we were talking about manufacturing in China as compared to India.
Right.
So when we do the manufacturing in China and have to bring those devices in India, we have to go through the custom duty, taxes, everything.
Yes.
So
And that's where you have to be very smart, Surajit. You have to look at using either you do see in India, right? Customs duty significantly varies from importing finished goods as compared to importing components. Right. There's a reason why Lava and all these supposedly India phones import all their components from China and then assemble it here in Gurgaon and sell it as made in India. Right, because the duty is much lower. I think it's something like 33% to 17% or something like that, some number.
So if we for the timing, if we consider that the manufacturing in China and manufacturing in India will bring the same amount of quality, considering the import duties and taxes, which one will be a cheaper option? Totally doing it in India or in China?
Depends on volume. If you're doing it in China, it will be at least 1/6 the cost, including duty.
So it will be much less.
Yeah. For volume, that is.
Okay, sir. Understood. Okay.
I didn't get. So is it that for lower volumes, it's probably more cost effective to do it in India, and for higher volumes in China? Is that what it means?
Yes. Again, there is a break-even point. You guys have to do what is known as a price sensitivity analysis. That's a tool used to figure out at what price will your product be cheaper in India as compared to China, right? So I'll just throw some numbers at you, right? So for example, the injection mold, which we actually got done in Bangalore, right? Got done by a very reputed injection mold guy, was 42 lakhs, right? It cost us to do that. It took us about, I would say anywhere from 4.5 to 6 months to do it, right? After repeated follow-ups, this, that, and all that, right? In Guangdong, we got it done for 4 lakhs, right? And they did it in 16 days. That's a difference. Huge difference. I mean, leave alone all the advertising and all about. Go there and you'll see a huge difference. China is somewhere else.
Right, sir. So I think we will keep in touch with you through email because we shall be needing a lot of help from you. Because
no problem. I run a startup network, so you can come present if you need to in IIM Bangalore, in IIC if you need to. Of course, now with COVID, it's all not happening, but later, right? And I'm only glad to help out. So please reach out in case you need help.
I think we should tell more about our product and probably we'll get a better understanding and you can suggest us better.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. All the best, guys.
Yeah. So
good luck.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anand.
No problem. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Binoy.